My mother's first words in the emergency room were not, "Is Tessa alive?" She looked past me toward the trauma bay, where my 17-year-old daughter was bleeding behind a curtain, and asked, "How bad is the car?" My father wanted to know if it was totaled. Neither of them asked about their granddaughter. I was still trying to understand what I had heard when, 20 minutes later, a state trooper walked in carrying Tessa's phone. He looked at my parents, then at me. "Good. You're both here. We need to talk about why Tessa was out on County M." My mother's hands started shaking. Until that moment, I had thought the worst thing in that hospital was the crash. Before I tell you what happened next, I hope you'll stay with me to the end, because what I learned that afternoon changed not only the way I saw my parents, but the way I understood my own daughter. And if stories about families, choices, and the things we sometimes recognize too late mean something to you, I'd be glad to have you subscribe and stay with us. The call had come at 3:41 on a Wednesday afternoon. I remember the exact time because I had been staring at the clock above the production floor, calculating whether I could finish a shipping report before leaving work. The presses behind the glass were running hard enough that I felt them through the soles of my shoes. My coffee had gone cold. It was the kind of ordinary afternoon you never imagine, dividing your life into a before and an after. Then my phone lit up with an unfamiliar local number, and I answered. The woman identified herself from the emergency department before asking whether I was Tessa Donovan's mother. Everything after my daughter's name seemed to arrive in fragments. Motor vehicle collision. Ambulance. Dane County. Conscious at the scene. Now unstable. Internal bleeding suspected. Come immediately. I stood up so quickly that my chair rolled backward and hit the file cabinet behind me. One of the supervisors looked through the glass and started toward my office. I was already grabbing my bag. There are moments when a mother's mind does something cruelly efficient. Mine eliminated everything unnecessary. I did not think about work. I did not remember locking my office. I do not remember telling anyone where I was going, though I later learned that I had. I called Grant as I crossed the parking lot, and the only sentence I clearly remember saying was that Tessa had been in an accident and they were taking her into surgery. Grant was across town checking a difficult installation with one of his crews. He told me he was leaving immediately. I drove to the hospital, with both hands locked around the wheel, and my eyes fixed on the road, as if looking anywhere else would make something worse happen. Tessa had driven those same roads hundreds of times. That thought kept circling back. She had been driving on her own for more than a year. She knew the route from school to the bakery, where she worked 3 afternoons a week, and I could practically hear her voice whenever I checked my mirrors. "Mom, I know. Mom, I'm not 12. Mom, you don't have to tell me every single time." That morning had begun with another version of the same argument. Nothing dramatic. Nothing worthy of remembering under ordinary circumstances. Tessa had been standing in the kitchen in her school hoodie with one sneaker tied and the other loose, trying to drink orange juice while checking something on her phone. I had reminded her to text if her bakery shift changed and to let me know if she went anywhere after work. She had looked at me over the rim of the glass, with the exhausted patience teenagers reserve for parents who have apparently survived decades without learning anything. She told me I said I trusted her, but acted as if every decision needed my approval. I told her there was a difference between trust and knowing where your 17-year-old daughter was. She had slung her backpack over one shoulder and said I wanted her to grow up, only when growing up looked exactly the way I had planned it. That irritated me more than it should have. As she reached the door, I had told her, "Being independent means proving you can handle the consequences." She had looked back at me for half a second. Not angry exactly. More like tired. Then she left. By the time I reached the hospital that afternoon, I would have given anything to take that sentence back. Not because I thought the accident was some punishment for our argument, but because suddenly the last ordinary words between us felt unbearably heavy. The emergency department smelled of disinfectant, overheated air, and the faint metallic scent that seemed to cling to every hospital no matter how clean it was. A nurse met me before I had finished giving Tessa's name. She guided me into a small consultation area, rather than toward the waiting room. That frightened me more than anything. People who were fine did not require private rooms. A trauma surgeon came in not long afterward. I remember his hands. They were steady, while mine would not stop shaking. He explained that Tessa had suffered significant abdominal trauma and that imaging showed internal bleeding. They were preparing her for emergency surgery. She also had fractured ribs and an injury to her left wrist, but those were not what concerned him most at that moment. He did not bury me in medical language. He told me what mattered. They needed to stop the bleeding. They needed to do it quickly. She had been conscious when first responders reached her, which was good, but her blood pressure had begun dropping before she arrived. I signed forms without remembering what my signature looked like. Someone returned my driver's license. Someone asked whether Grant was coming. Someone asked about Tessa's allergies. I answered everything, because mothers answer questions when there is nothing else they can do. Then they let me see her for less than a minute before taking her upstairs. The image has never left me. Tessa looked smaller on that hospital bed than she had looked in years. Her hair was tangled around her face. There was dried blood near one temple from a shallow cut. Her left wrist had already been stabilized. Tubing disappeared beneath a blanket. A monitor threw green light across the side of her face. Her eyes opened when I stepped close. She did not say anything profound. She whispered that she was cold. I pulled the blanket higher, even though I knew that was not enough to fix anything. I touched her hair and told her I was there. Her eyes closed again. Then the bed was moving. Nurses were moving with it. And I had to stop walking when one of them gently told me that I could not go farther. The doors shut. I stood there with my hand still half raised. That was where Grant found me. He came down the corridor, still wearing his work boots, one side of his jacket streaked with gray dust. I had never seen him move so quickly without running. He put both hands on my shoulders and searched my face before I managed to tell him that Tessa was in surgery. He asked about her before he asked anything else. Of course he did. That should not have mattered. Later, it mattered very much. In the minutes before my parents arrived, Grant and I sat shoulder to shoulder without pretending we could comfort each other. He kept one hand around mine, and the other braced against his knee. Every time the doors at the end of the corridor opened, both of us looked up. Once it was a nurse carrying folded linens. Once it was a man pushing an empty wheelchair. Once it was a family I did not know walking out with relief written all over their faces. I remember resenting them for half a second, and then hating myself for it. The hospital had reduced my world to one question: whether Tessa would come back through those doors, and there was nothing I could do to influence the answer. That helplessness was already working on me long before I understood how much fear would shape the months ahead. We had been sitting in the family waiting area for perhaps 15 minutes when my parents arrived. My mother, Linda Parker, was 66 then. She was the kind of woman who could walk through a storm and arrive with her coat buttoned correctly. Even frightened, she looked composed from a distance. Her silver blonde hair was still smooth from whatever appointment she had been at that afternoon. She carried her purse tight beneath one arm. My father, Raymond, came 2 steps behind her. He had spent most of his life running a neighborhood hardware store, and retirement had not changed the way he looked at problems. He assessed damage, cost, repair, replacement, usually before anyone else had finished describing what was wrong. For most of my life, I had called that reliability. My mother reached me first. Her eyes moved toward the closed trauma corridor. Then she looked directly at me and asked, "How bad is the car?" For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood her. There are sentences so out of place that the brain rejects them. I stared at her. Behind me, a television mounted high on the wall was playing a muted local news segment. Somewhere down the corridor, a cart squeaked every few seconds, as a hospital employee pushed it over a seam in the floor. Grant's hand tightened around mine. My father stepped closer and asked whether the SUV was totaled. Not whether Tessa had regained consciousness. Not what the surgeon had said. Not whether their only granddaughter was going to live. The car. The first car Tessa had ever driven on her own. The used SUV my father had bought the previous November and proudly announced was for Tessa, though the title remained in his name until she turned 18. Everyone in our family understood that part. We had never hidden it. Raymond paid most of the insurance. Tessa covered much of her own fuel. We had viewed the whole arrangement as generous. Until that moment, I had never thought much further than that. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Grant answered before I did, though even he kept his voice controlled. He told them Tessa was in surgery because she was bleeding internally. My mother's face changed then. Her lips parted. The hand holding her purse loosened slightly. She asked how serious it was, and I could see real fear finally reach her. That almost made the first question worse, because it meant she was capable of understanding exactly what mattered. It simply had not been the first place her mind had gone. I told myself shock did strange things to people. My mother had always coped by finding something concrete she could control, and my father did own the vehicle and would eventually need insurance information. I supplied those explanations before either of them asked me to. I had spent years explaining my parents before anyone else had the chance to judge them. Grant said very little after that. He sat beside me with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the surgery board screen mounted across the room. I could feel his anger without him giving it a name. My father eventually asked where the collision had happened. I realized I did not know. Not exactly. The hospital had told me only that Tessa had come in from a crash in the western part of Dane County. My mother said it was probably somewhere near the bakery. She said it too quickly. It was a small thing. A sentence that might have meant nothing. At the time, I barely registered it, because I was watching the hallway every time anyone in scrubs appeared. But Grant looked at her. Then he looked at me. About 20 minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and a uniformed Wisconsin state trooper stepped into the waiting area. He was not rushing. That somehow made me pay more attention. He carried a small, clear property bag containing Tessa's phone and a few other personal belongings recovered from the scene. I recognized her phone immediately from the chipped corner of the case. She had dropped it on our driveway 2 weeks earlier and refused to replace the case because, in her words, it still worked. My mother saw it too. Her fingers moved against the strap of her purse. The trooper checked the names a nurse had given him, then looked at my parents. "Good. You're both here. We need to talk about why Tessa was out on County M." My mother's hands began to tremble. Not dramatically. If I had not been staring at her, I might have missed it. The purse strap shook once between her fingers. She tightened her grip until it stopped. The trooper introduced himself as Isaac Moreno and explained. In the compressed way people do when they have repeated the same facts all afternoon, that the SUV was registered to Raymond. He also told us that Tessa had been conscious briefly when first responders reached her and had said she was on her way to pick up her grandmother from an appointment. That was all he knew about the reason she was there. He had not searched her phone. He was simply returning property recovered from the vehicle. I looked at my mother. Tessa was supposed to be working. On Wednesdays she left school, grabbed something small to eat, and drove almost directly to the bakery. Her manager knew the routine. Grant knew the routine. I knew the routine. My mother had known it too. The silence stretched long enough that Moreno had to repeat the practical question. Had Linda been expecting Tessa? My mother admitted that she had asked Tessa to come get her. She said it quietly, as if lowering her voice could make the fact smaller. I asked why. Linda explained that she had finished an appointment in Middleton, earlier than expected, and needed a ride home. There were other options. She could have waited. She could have called a rideshare. She could have called my father. My father had been at a luncheon he had apparently not wanted to leave early. Tessa, on the other hand, was already out. That phrase sat badly with me. Already out. As though a 17-year-old on her way to work was an unused vehicle passing through town. My father said it had been one favor. Nothing more. Trooper Moreno was not interested in our family argument. He needed the timeline. Approximately when Linda contacted Tessa, where Linda had expected to be picked up, and whether anyone else had known about the change. He kept the conversation factual. He also told us something that should have relieved me. Preliminary information from the scene pointed toward the other vehicle entering Tessa's path at the intersection. The full crash review would take time, and he was careful not to make promises, but nothing he had seen so far suggested that Tessa had deliberately gone somewhere reckless, or that they were treating her as the primary cause of the collision. The accident itself, at least in that moment, was becoming simpler. Another driver had made a terrible mistake. What was becoming more complicated was why my daughter had been on that road at all. Moreno eventually left us with contact information and told us someone would follow up if more factual questions were necessary. I barely noticed him go. The property bag containing Tessa's phone sat beside my purse. I did not touch it. My attention was on my parents. I asked my mother why Tessa had not called me if her plans changed. Linda said she did not know. My father looked toward the surgery board. Something about the way he avoided my eyes irritated me. I asked again, this time more carefully, why Tessa would risk being late for work just because Mom did not want to wait for another ride. Raymond exhaled through his nose. It was the same sound he used to make when I was younger, and asked a question he thought had an obvious answer. Then he said, because she knows what the car requires. I felt Grant turn beside me. My mother's eyes dropped. I stared at my father. For the first time that afternoon, the car stopped being a wrecked piece of metal somewhere on County M. It became something else. Something I had apparently misunderstood for almost a year. What does the car require? I asked. My father did not answer. At that exact moment, the double doors down the corridor opened, and a nurse called my name. Tessa's surgery was beginning. I followed the nurse because there was nowhere else in the world I could possibly have gone. But as the doors closed behind me, one thought followed me through them. My 17-year-old daughter had been living by a set of rules involving my parents, her car, and her time. And somehow, I was the last person in the family to know they existed. The nurse who called my name did not bring news. She brought another form, another question, another small task that had to be completed while strangers worked to keep my daughter alive. Tessa's surgery had started. The nurse needed to confirm a few details that had been rushed when I first arrived. Then she led me back to the waiting area and told me someone would update us as soon as the surgical team could. I returned to the same chair beside Grant, but the room no longer felt the same. My father's sentence had changed it. Because she knows what the car requires. The words sat between us, even after Raymond moved to the far end of the waiting area and began staring at his phone without really looking at it. My mother sat beside him with both hands wrapped around her purse. Neither of them volunteered an explanation. I could have demanded one. Grant clearly wanted me to. I could feel that in the way his knee moved restlessly beside mine. But Tessa was behind two sets of locked doors with surgeons trying to stop internal bleeding. Everything else had to wait. That was what I told myself. For almost 3 hours, the hospital reduced our lives to fragments. A nurse appeared once to say the procedure was progressing. Someone brought water none of us drank. Grant walked to a vending machine and came back empty-handed because he had apparently forgotten why he went. My father stood twice, sat again, and checked the same watch he had worn for nearly 20 years. My mother kept smoothing one thumb over the leather edge of her purse until the skin around her nail turned red. I watched all of it, because watching people was easier than imagining what was happening to Tessa. Every few minutes, the phrase came back. What the car requires. Until that afternoon, the SUV had been one of the least complicated things in our family. Raymond had found the used SUV the previous November through someone he knew from his hardware store years. He had paid cash and kept the title in his name until Tessa turned 18. Grant and I knew he covered most of the insurance while Tessa paid for much of her gas. We had been grateful. Tessa had been thrilled when he handed her the key, and I had reinforced the arrangement more than once. Grandpa did something generous for you. Of course you help him out sometimes. Sitting under the fluorescent hospital lights, I tried to remember when sometimes had acquired rules I did not know about. Sitting under the fluorescent hospital lights, I tried to remember when sometimes had acquired rules I did not know about. The surgeon finally came out shortly after 7. I knew it was him before he reached us, because I recognized the green surgical cap folded in one hand. Grant stood immediately. I stood a second later, and almost lost my balance. The surgeon's expression was serious, but it was not the expression I had been afraid of. They had controlled the abdominal bleeding. Tessa had tolerated the procedure. She would need close monitoring, pain management, and time. The fractured ribs and wrist would complicate recovery, but there was no indication of a spinal cord injury or a major head injury. He would not promise that everything would be easy. He would only say that, for that night, she was stable. Stable. I had never understood how beautiful that word could sound. Grant's shoulders dropped for the first time since he arrived. He put one hand over his face, and I watched him breathe through his fingers. My mother cried. Quietly, genuinely. She pressed a tissue to her eyes and asked when Tessa might wake enough to see us. That mattered too. I did not want my parents to become monsters simply because I had heard something ugly from them. Linda loved Tessa. I knew that. Raymond loved her too. There were 17 years of birthdays, school plays, Sunday dinners, driving lessons, Christmas ornaments, badly wrapped presents, and photographs to prove it. The problem was no longer whether they loved her. The problem was that I had begun to wonder what their love expected in return. We were allowed only limited contact that night. Tessa remained groggy, monitored closely, and in no condition for questions. I sat beside her for a while after she was settled, watching the rise and fall of the blanket. Her left wrist was immobilized. Bruising had begun to darken along one side of her face and neck. The monitor beside her bed made soft electronic sounds that I would later hear in dreams for months. I did not ask why she had been on County M. I did not ask what Grandpa's car required. I told her she was safe. That was all. The next morning, once it was clear Tessa had made it through the night, the rest of the world began returning whether I wanted it to or not. Phones had to be charged. Work had to be notified. Insurance existed. Her school needed to know she would be absent. The bakery needed an explanation. None of those things cared that I was still mentally standing in the ER, hearing my mother ask about a car. Trooper Moreno called Grant, rather than appearing in person again. I listened while Grant put the call on speaker. There was no dramatic new discovery. Moreno simply clarified what had been gathered from the scene, and what still remained preliminary. Tessa had left school and headed west, rather than toward the bakery. She had been driving in the direction of the place where Linda had finished her appointment. At the intersection, another vehicle had failed to yield and entered her path. Witness statements and the initial scene assessment pointed toward that driver as the primary cause, although the formal review and insurance process would take longer. That was enough for me. I did not need to know the exact angle of impact. I did not need measurements, diagrams, or a reconstruction of the final 5 seconds. Another driver had made a mistake. Tessa had been hurt. The part I could not stop thinking about had happened before the crash. Why had she been there? My mother answered more completely when I asked her later that morning. She had finished an appointment in Middleton sooner than she expected. My father was at a luncheon and did not want to leave early. Linda said she could have waited for another ride, but Tessa was already out driving, and the detour wasn't that far. Except Tessa had been going to work. That fact seemed to matter less to my mother than it did to me. She said the bakery would have managed if Tessa arrived a little late. Teenagers changed shifts all the time. Tessa had a car because Raymond had made sure she had transportation. Helping family occasionally was part of being responsible. None of Linda's explanations sounded outrageous alone. Family helps family. It was only one ride. The bakery would understand. Raymond paid for the car. The problem was how easily those ordinary sentences made Tessa's work, and plans become the flexible part of everyone else's day. My father was even calmer. When I finally asked him what he had meant by what the car requires, he did not behave like a man caught keeping a secret. He behaved like a man confused that I needed an explanation. He reminded me that the SUV was legally his, that he paid most of the insurance, and that in his mind, occasional help was part of teaching Tessa that independence came with responsibility. I could not disagree with every part of that. That was the first thing that frightened me, because I had believed almost the same thing. I told him there was a difference between asking Tessa to pick up groceries on a Saturday and expecting her to change a work commitment without telling us. Raymond said I was exaggerating one bad afternoon because of the crash. The words stung because I had been waiting to hear something like them. Not an apology, a correction, a reminder that my interpretation was the problem. I might have continued arguing, but Grant touched my arm. Not to stop me, to tell me I did not have to solve it then. That was when I realized my hands were shaking. I left my parents in the family waiting area and walked down the corridor until I found an empty corner near a window. Outside, September sunlight lay across the parking structure, as though the world had not noticed anything unusual. Grant followed a minute later. He did not say I told you so. I loved him for that. He did say that whatever arrangement existed between Tessa and my parents needed to stop until we understood it. I agreed with the first half. The second half was where we separated. Grant believed that if adults had been using a car to pressure our 17-year-old daughter into changing work commitments, they had already forfeited the right to keep doing it. He wanted us to make that clear immediately. I wanted to hear Tessa first. Maybe part of that was fairness. Maybe part of it was cowardice. At the time, I told myself it was respect for my daughter. I said we could not spend the previous year telling Tessa she was mature enough to drive and work and make decisions, then decide an arrangement she had apparently agreed to meant nothing before she could explain why she had agreed. Grant leaned against the wall and looked at me for several seconds. He was exhausted. There was stubble along his jaw, and he had worn the same clothes since the previous afternoon. When he finally spoke, he did not raise his voice. He said I had spent years asking for one more explanation whenever my parents crossed a line. That hurt far more than if he had shouted. I told him this was not about protecting my parents. He said he hoped not. The conversation ended there because neither of us had enough sleep or certainty to keep going without saying something worse. But a small crack had opened. Grant believed the pattern was already obvious. I still believed patterns should be proven before you acted on them. By late morning, I had to call Tessa's school and her manager at the bakery. The school call was brief and administrative. I explained there had been an accident and that we would update them when we knew more about her return. The woman I spoke with was kind, but kindness from strangers was becoming difficult to tolerate because it reminded me how basic concern was supposed to sound. The bakery manager was different. Her name was Denise. I had met her several times when picking Tessa up before she had the SUV. She was a practical woman in her 40s who had always spoken well of Tessa. She told me immediately not to worry about the shift. Someone had covered it. They were all asking about her. Then she hesitated. It was subtle enough that if I had not spent the previous 24 hours listening for things people were not saying, I might have missed it. Denise said Tessa had texted before the accident that she would be late because of a family issue. I asked whether that had happened before. There was a pause, not a guilty pause. More like the pause of an adult wondering whether something belonged to her. Denise told me Tessa had asked to come in late or switch a few shifts over the previous several months for family-related reasons. Nothing constant. Nothing severe enough to create a disciplinary problem. Tessa was reliable, which was probably why Denise remembered the exceptions. Several months. I sat down in the hospital chair beside Tessa's bed while Denise spoke. My daughter was asleep. A line of bruising showed above the hospital blanket near her shoulder. Several months. I tried to picture her calendar. School, work, friends, homework, driving, grandparents. I remembered nights she came home later than expected and said the bakery had run behind. Saturdays when she changed plans at the last minute. Once she had skipped dinner with us because Grandma needed something and she was already over there. At the time, none of those things had connected. They had been ordinary scraps of teenage life. Now they began lining up. I asked Denise if Tessa had ever complained about the family requests. Denise said not really. Then she remembered something. She almost laughed when she told me because that was how she had taken it at the time. A joke. Tessa had once asked to swap a Saturday shift. When Denise teased her about becoming the family chauffeur, Tessa had shrugged and said, "If I say no again, Grandpa might take the car back." Denise had assumed she was kidding. So had Tessa, maybe. Or maybe she had learned to make jokes out of things she did not know how to explain. I thanked Denise and ended the call without asking for dates or demanding every scheduling record. I did not need a spreadsheet. The pattern had already become visible enough to scare me. When Grant came back from getting coffee, I told him what Denise had said. His face hardened. This time, he did not say anything about my parents. He looked at Tessa instead. That was worse. I knew what he was seeing because I was seeing it too. Our daughter had apparently been negotiating with adults behind our backs, balancing school and work against whatever she believed she owed for the right to keep driving a car. Everyone in the family had called a gift, and I had helped teach her the language that made it sound reasonable. Grandpa gave you that car. Of course you should help. Grant wanted to call Raymond immediately. I asked him not to. His jaw tightened. I told him I was not protecting my father. I was protecting Tessa's right to tell us what she had agreed to before we decided for her what counted as pressure. He asked how much worse it had to get before the distinction stopped mattering. I did not have an answer. I only knew that Tessa had spent months making decisions none of us knew about, and the fastest way to lose whatever trust remained might be to wake her up and announce that we had already decided what all of it meant. So we waited. Not comfortably, not peacefully. We waited because Tessa was still our daughter, not the evidence in a case we were building against my parents. That afternoon, a nurse handed me the clear property bag Trooper Moreno had returned the previous day. Tessa's phone was inside. The case was cracked near the corner. Dust clung to the edge of the screen. I could see several notification icons glowing beneath the lock screen. For one terrible second, the answer seemed close enough to touch. I knew Tessa's passcode, not because I secretly checked her phone. She had given it to Grant and me years earlier for emergencies, and it had never changed. I could have opened it. I could have searched her messages with my mother. I could have counted every call from my father. I could have reconstructed months of requests while Tessa slept 6 feet away. My thumb rested against the plastic bag. Then I looked at her. The girl who had spent the last year asking me to trust her. The girl I had told, less than 24 hours before the crash, that independence meant proving she could handle consequences. Maybe she had handled some things badly. Maybe my parents had taken advantage of that. Maybe both were true. But if I opened her phone while she could not stop me, I would be deciding that my fear gave me more right to her life than she did. I placed the bag inside my purse and zipped it shut. Whatever that phone contained, I would not take it from her. I would wait until Tessa could tell me herself. Because by then I understood one thing clearly. The crash had put my daughter on a road she was never supposed to be on. I was beginning to suspect the car had been putting her on roads I knew nothing about for months. Tessa was awake for less than 10 minutes the first time she was fully herself again. Not awake in the technical sense. She had opened her eyes before that. She had answered nurses when they asked her name. She had squeezed fingers, followed instructions, swallowed water from a sponge, and drifted in and out beneath the weight of medication and exhaustion. But there was a difference between consciousness and presence, and I knew my daughter well enough to recognize the moment she came back into the room as Tessa. It happened the second morning after surgery. Grant had gone downstairs to get coffee, and I was sitting beside the window with my shoes off, watching a thin band of September sun move slowly across the floor. I had slept badly in the reclining chair, and looked worse than I felt, which was saying something. Tessa had been quiet for nearly an hour, when I heard the faint rustle of her blanket. Her eyes opened. She looked first at the ceiling, then at the IV line, then at the brace on her wrist. After a few seconds, she turned her head toward me. Her voice was rough. She asked why I looked like I had been sleeping in a bus station. I laughed before I could stop myself. It came out wrong, half laugh, half sob, and I pressed my knuckles against my mouth because I did not want to frighten her. That tiny joke told me more than any monitor could. Tessa was still in there. The daughter who had rolled her eyes at me over orange juice 48 hours earlier was still capable of noticing my hair before she noticed the gravity of her own condition. I moved closer and helped her with a few sips of water. She winced when she shifted. The fractured ribs made every movement deliberate, and the abdominal incision meant she could not reposition herself without help. She hated that. I could tell from the way her jaw tightened when the nurse adjusted her pillows. Tessa had always preferred struggling privately to asking someone to do something for her. Even as a little girl, she had wanted to button her own coat, carry her own backpack, open jars she did not have the strength to open. Grant used to joke that if we left her alone long enough, she would eventually try to file her own taxes in elementary school. At 17, independence was no longer cute. It had become the place where we fought. She looked at the room again, gathering herself. Then she asked what day it was. I told her it was Friday morning. Her eyebrows drew together. The first thing she said after that was not about the SUV. It was not about Grandma. It was not even about the accident. She asked whether Denise thought she had just skipped work. The question caught me so off guard that for a second I thought I had misunderstood. Her concern made more sense when I watched what she did next. She tried to lift her injured wrist, as if she might reach for the call button herself, then stopped when pain pulled across her ribs. Even weakened, she was already trying to account for the promise she had made to someone else. I told her Denise knew about the crash and had covered the shift. The tension in Tessa's mouth eased before the rest of her body did. It was a small reaction, but it showed me something the later conversation would make impossible to ignore. She did not think of herself as someone being pushed around. She thought of herself as someone who had agreed to responsibilities and was failing to meet them. That difference was why simply calling her a victim would never have reached her. I told her the bakery knew what happened. Denise had covered the shift and had been asking about her. Tessa closed her eyes. Not from pain. Relief. A small, ridiculous piece of relief, compared with surgery and broken bones, but real enough that I saw it in her shoulders. She whispered that she had texted she would be late but never made it there. I told her nobody thought she had abandoned her job. She nodded once and let her head sink deeper into the pillow. That should have been a tiny moment. Instead, it stayed with me. My daughter was lying in a hospital bed after emergency surgery, and she was worried that someone might think she had failed to show up where she was supposed to be. Responsibility. That word had been circling our family for 2 days. My father used it to explain the car. I had used it to explain adulthood. Tessa seemed to wear it like a weight. I did not ask her anything about my parents that morning. She had barely been awake long enough to understand where she was. I had promised myself I would hear the truth from her, but that did not give me permission to take it before she was ready. The nurses needed her to rest. Pain medication blurred the edges of the morning. Grant came back. Tessa managed another weak joke about his coffee smelling terrible, then drifted away again. By afternoon, she was more alert, though every movement still cost her. Her ribs made laughing and coughing hurt. Her abdominal incision made repositioning difficult, and standing still required help. The medical details mattered only insofar as they showed how little energy she had for anything else. By late afternoon, she wanted her phone. And yet by late afternoon, she wanted her phone. The request was so ordinary that it frightened me. I had kept the clear property bag inside my purse, exactly where I had placed it the previous day. I retrieved it and set it on the blanket beside her. The case looked worse now that I could see it in daylight. Dust had lodged along one edge, and the chipped corner had cracked farther in the collision. Tessa touched it with her good hand. She stared at it longer than I expected. I wondered what she remembered. I did not ask. She unlocked it herself. That mattered to me. She scrolled through the flood of notifications. Slowly, school friends, the bakery, messages from people who must have heard about the crash. I watched her face change as the scale of other people's concern reached her. She stopped once and blinked hard. Then she continued. I moved my chair back slightly. Not far. Just enough to make it clear that the screen belonged to her. A few minutes passed before she stopped scrolling. Her thumb hovered. Then she looked at me. Mom. There was something different in her voice. Not fear exactly. More like the discomfort of knowing that a conversation you had avoided was about to happen, whether you wanted it to or not. She turned the phone toward me. There was a short message thread with my mother from the afternoon of the crash. I read only what Tessa showed me. Linda had told her the appointment had ended and asked whether she could pick her up. Tessa had replied that she was supposed to be at work. My mother's final message before the crash was still visible. Don't make this a whole thing with your mom. Just come get me. For a moment, the hospital noise disappeared. I did not scroll upward. I did not take the phone from Tessa. I read that one line twice and then looked at my daughter. My mother had known I might object and had chosen to go around me. Seeing that message, I finally understood why her hands had shaken when Moreno carried Tessa's phone into the ER. It was not evidence of a crime. It was proof that she had knowingly bypassed me. I did not scroll upward, take the phone, or ask to see anything else. Tessa turned the phone back toward herself and locked the screen. She rested it against the blanket. I asked why she had gone. I kept my voice low. No accusation, no demand, just the question that had followed me since the ER. Tessa looked at the ceiling for several seconds. Then she said the words that changed the shape of the story again. Because I knew the deal. She said it like the answer should have been obvious. That hurt more than if she had said Grandma made me. I waited. Tessa explained in pieces, with long pauses because talking tired her out. Grandpa owned the SUV. Grandpa paid most of the insurance. She paid for a lot of her gas, but not all of what the car actually cost. When he bought it, he told her that having something valuable meant proving she could be responsible with it. At first that meant grades, curfew, basic care of the vehicle, helping out now and then. None of that surprised me. I knew those parts. Then, now and then, began stretching. Grocery pickups, rides, a prescription, taking Grandma somewhere because Grandpa had another plan. The requests were ordinary enough that Tessa still described them as parts of an agreement, not as complaints. Tessa did not list them as complaints. That was the first thing I noticed. She listed them like items in an agreement she had accepted. I told her quietly that helping families sometimes was not the same as missing work because Grandma did not want to wait for another ride. Her expression changed. Not much, a tightening around the eyes. She said she knew that. Then, almost immediately, she defended the arrangement again. She had wanted the car badly. Before the SUV, she depended on us for rides to work, school events, friends' houses, and weekend plans. The first month she had it, she seemed taller. It felt less like transportation than adulthood arriving early. She knew Grandpa still owned it and paid most of the insurance. She had agreed to help, and she did not want me rewriting that choice just because the crash had changed how I saw it. I told her there was a difference between agreeing to help and believing you could not say no. Her face sharpened. The conversation shifted before I realized it. She told me to stop talking as if she had been tricked into everything. That was not what I was trying to say, but I heard how quickly I had started assigning roles. My parents as manipulators, Tessa as victim, me as the person who finally understood. The truth was not that clean. I wanted the car, she said. Her voice was weak, but the irritation underneath it was familiar. I knew Grandpa still owned it. I told her I understood. She shook her head slightly. No, she said. I understood now, after the crash. She had understood it before. That distinction was important to her. Maybe because she was ashamed. Maybe because she was proud. Probably both. I asked whether being late to work had been part of what she agreed to. That stopped her. Her eyes moved toward the window. I could almost see the argument changing shape in her mind. After a moment, she said it had not started that way. There it was. Not a confession. Not a dramatic reveal. Just the first crack in the word deal. It had changed. I asked how. Tessa closed her eyes for a moment. She was tired, and I nearly stopped. Then she continued on her own. At first, saying no had been easy. Grandpa might complain, but nothing happened. Then he started reminding her about insurance. If she was too busy to help family, maybe she was too busy to handle a car. If she could make time for friends, she could make time for Grandma. None of it had sounded like a threat when said individually. That was exactly what I had already begun discovering. Every sentence could stand alone and look reasonable. Together, they built a wall. I heard myself ask why she had never told me. Tessa looked straight at me. Because you told me to help them. The words landed without anger. That made them worse. I opened my mouth and then closed it. She was right. I remembered the driveway the week after Raymond bought the SUV. Tessa had been annoyed because he wanted her to take a box of supplies across town on a Saturday when she had plans. I had told her Grandpa had just bought her a car. Of course she should help sometimes. I had meant gratitude and balance, not permission for my parents to treat her job as optional or threaten the car whenever she said no. But explaining what I had meant would not change what Tessa had heard. I remembered saying it, and I did not defend myself. I told her I remembered saying it. That was all. Her expression softened by a fraction. Then Grant came in. He had spent the previous hour downstairs handling insurance calls we had agreed not to discuss in front of Tessa unless necessary. He took one look at our faces and understood that something had happened. I told him Tessa had shown me the message from Linda and explained, briefly, what she had said about the arrangement. Grant's response was physical, before it was verbal. His shoulders tightened. He looked toward the hallway, as if he expected my parents to appear. Then he looked at Tessa. He asked whether Grandpa had ever actually taken the car away. Tessa said no. Had he threatened to? Not exactly, she said. That phrase again. Not exactly. Grant rubbed one hand across his mouth. I knew what he wanted to say. That it ended now. No more requests, no more leverage, no more grandparents controlling transportation. I also knew what I had promised myself after our argument in the hallway. Tessa was not evidence. She was not a problem for us to solve while she watched. Before Grant could turn fear into a plan, I asked Tessa what she wanted us to understand. That changed the room. She looked at me for several seconds. Then she said she had not been afraid of Grandpa, in the way we seemed to think. She had been afraid of losing what the car gave her. There was a difference. She had work, friends, school, a life that became much harder without transportation. If Grandpa took the SUV back, she would not be trapped in some terrible way. Grant and I would drive her, but she would lose freedom. That mattered enough that she kept making compromises. Grant listened. He did not interrupt. I was grateful for that. Tessa rested again for several minutes before she spoke. Her voice was quieter. She said she also knew that college was coming. That sentence made my stomach tighten. I asked what the car had to do with college. She looked embarrassed. Not guilty. Embarrassed. She said Grandma and Grandpa had told her they wanted to help. I knew that much. In a vague sense. My parents had mentioned helping with college for years. The way grandparents talk about things far enough away to feel theoretical. We'll help when the time comes. Don't worry. She's our only grandchild. I had never treated those comments like a financial plan. Apparently, Tessa had. She knew enough about tuition to understand that our 529 would not erase every cost. She had overheard Grant and me discussing aid, public universities, and what we could contribute without damaging our retirement. We had never told her college was a burden, but teenagers hear more than parents realize. When Grandma and Grandpa said they could help if she stayed close enough to remain involved with the family, Tessa had treated the offer as another problem she could help solve herself. She did not want to come to us every time something became difficult, and she did not want us paying for everything if she could reduce the load. Then she said the sentence I was least prepared to hear. I thought I was making things easier for you. My chest tightened. She was 17 and had been accepting conditions, partly because she believed she was reducing the burden on us. Independence, responsibility, and awareness of money were qualities I had encouraged. I had been proud of them. Now I could see how those same qualities could make it harder for her to recognize when a bargain kept changing. Grant moved closer to the bed. He told her, in the simplest terms he could manage, that she was not responsible for making college easy for us. Tessa looked irritated again. Not because she disagreed. Because she hated being spoken to as if she had misunderstood something obvious. She said she knew we would help. That was not the point. The point was that she wanted choices. The car gave her choices. Grandma and Grandpa's money could give her choices. At least, that was how she had thought about it. I heard the word could, past tense without her noticing. I asked what she meant when she said she might have to stay close. She hesitated. Then she said Grandma and Grandpa had opinions about which schools made sense. Of course they did. Every family had opinions. Grant and I had opinions too. But something in Tessa's face told me this was not just dinner table commentary. I asked whether their opinions had changed anything she planned to do. She picked at the edge of the blanket with her good hand. That tiny movement made me more afraid than any dramatic pause could have. Finally, she said yes. I did not ask for names. I did not ask which school. I did not ask what Grandma had promised or what Grandpa had threatened. Not yet. Tessa had given us enough for one afternoon. A nurse came in soon afterward to check her vitals and help her reposition. The conversation ended naturally, and I let it. Grant and I stepped into the hallway while Tessa rested. Neither of us spoke for several moments. The corridor was quiet, except for the wheels of a medication cart farther down. In the hallway, Grant said he had spent 2 days thinking the car was buying favors from our daughter. Now we both understood the arrangement reached farther. The SUV had begun as a manageable exchange. A teenager wanted freedom. Her grandfather had something she wanted, and she agreed to help. What changed was that the meaning of what she owed kept expanding. The same language had started following her toward college. Late that evening, when Tessa was awake again, she asked me to hand her the phone. I did. She answered 2 messages from friends, then stopped. Her eyes remained on the screen. I assumed she was tired. Then she looked at me. There was no accusation in her expression, only reluctance. She told me there was one more thing I needed to know. I waited. Tessa swallowed and glanced toward Grant, then back at me. I already changed my college list because of them. And just like that, the car stopped being the biggest thing. My parents had taught my daughter she could lose. For several seconds after Tessa told me she had already changed her college list because of my parents, the sentence did not fit the version of her life I thought I knew. College had been one of the few subjects I believed still belonged to the ordinary friction between us. Distance, independence, how much a mother was allowed to ask. I had not known my parents were already inside those choices. Tessa was exhausted, so I refused to turn the hospital bed into an interrogation chair and told her we could talk later. The next few days were measured in smaller units than the life we had lived before the crash. How far Tessa could walk with help, how long she could sit upright before the pain in her ribs forced her back, whether she could tolerate food, whether the bruising looked darker because it was getting worse, or because that was simply what bruises did. A nurse taught us how to help without yanking on her injured wrist. Another explained what kinds of pain should worry us after discharge, and what kinds would simply be part of healing. I listened. I wrote down what mattered. Then I put the medical language away. By the 6th day after the crash, Tessa was cleared to go home. She moved carefully from the wheelchair into Grant's car, with her left wrist immobilized and a pillow hugged against her ribs. The drive from the hospital to our house was less than half an hour, but she kept her eyes closed almost the entire way. I watched her in the rearview mirror. Every time Grant slowed near an intersection, her fingers tightened around the pillow. She did not comment on it. Neither did I. Our house looked exactly the same when we pulled into the driveway. That offended me somehow. The maple by the sidewalk had guats that of package the mass and the reason ran the edges. A cardboard package sat beneath the porch light. One of Tessa's sneakers was still beside the bench inside the mudroom where she had kicked it off before school the week before. Nothing in the house understood that she had almost died. We brought her inside, arranged pillows on the couch, organized medication, and set up the spare bedroom downstairs, so she would not have to climb stairs until she felt stronger. For the first day home, that was enough. By the second, the questions began returning, not because I pushed them, because ordinary life kept exposing places where something no longer made sense. Denise from the bakery sent over a bag with Tessa's favorite muffin and a card signed by the staff. Tessa smiled when she saw it, then looked guilty. That expression was enough to pull me back toward the shift changes Denise had mentioned. I started noticing small adjustments I had dismissed over the previous year. A Saturday afternoon cut short because Grandma needed groceries. A school club meeting missed because Grandpa wanted something taken across town. A bakery shift made late after driving Linda somewhere. Each event, standing alone, looked harmless, even responsible. Together, they showed how often Tessa's schedule had become the flexible one. I asked Tessa only enough to understand the pattern. I did not need every date. I did not need a ledger. The point was not how many groceries she had picked up. The point was how easily, "Can you help?" had become, "You should help," and then, "You're expected to help." I asked her when she first remembered being afraid the car might actually be taken away. She considered the question longer than I expected. She said there had never been one dramatic threat. Grandpa simply started mentioning the car more often whenever she said no. Sometimes he reminded her what insurance cost. Sometimes he said he had trusted her with something valuable. Once, after she could not help because of a school commitment, he told her that if she was too busy to make time for family, perhaps she was not ready for the freedom of having a car. Tessa had laughed it off. Then the next time Grandma called, she changed her plans. That was how the line moved. Not all at once, an inch at a time. Grant was less interested in how gradually it had happened. To him, the fact that it happened at all was enough. He wanted to call Raymond and tell him the arrangement was finished. I understood the impulse better now. I was beginning to feel it myself, but every time I looked at Tessa, I remembered the way she had pushed back in the hospital when I called the deal unfair, as if I had already decided what her experience meant. She needed room to understand it too. That did not mean doing nothing. It meant not turning my anger into another set of orders. The larger revelation came 2 days after Tessa came home. She had been sitting at the dining table with her laptop open, trying to catch up on school email without exhausting herself. I brought her tea and saw a list of college bookmarks along the side of her browser. Most were familiar. 2 were not there. I recognized the absence before I understood it. One of the missing schools was a public university in northern Wisconsin that Tessa had talked about constantly in the spring. She had liked the program. I remembered how animated she had been when she first found it. She had brought the website up on my laptop while I was making dinner and turned the screen toward me to show photos of the campus, the residence halls, and a student organization connected to the program she was considering. She had already checked the drive from Madison. She had even joked that 5 hours was far enough to make me miss her and close enough that I could not claim she had moved to another planet. I had laughed then. Looking at the missing bookmark months later, I realized the school had once carried excitement in her voice. Whatever had replaced that excitement had happened quietly enough that I had accepted I'm not interested anymore. Without asking what changed. Liked the campus photos. Liked the fact that it was far enough away to feel different without requiring a plane ticket home. In July, she had scheduled a summer campus tour. I remembered because I had offered to go. Then, a few days beforehand, Tessa canceled. She told me she had lost interest. At the time, I had been secretly relieved. The drive was long. The school was farther than I wanted. I told myself I was respecting her judgment by not pressing. Now I stood behind her chair looking at the empty place where that school used to sit on her list. I asked when she removed it. Her shoulders stiffened. That answered me before she spoke, late July. Around the campus tour. I pulled out the chair beside her. Tessa shut the laptop halfway. For a moment I thought she was going to tell me she was tired. Instead, she told me the truth. Linda had not directly ordered her to cancel the tour. That distinction mattered to Tessa, and I let her make it. Grandma had asked why she was wasting a whole Saturday visiting a school nearly 5 hours away when there were good options closer to Madison. Tessa said she wanted to see it. Linda had replied that of course she could. Then she added that if Tessa eventually chose a school that far away, the help she and Raymond had talked about might not make sense anymore. They were not interested in paying for a future in which Tessa only came home twice a year. That same weekend, Linda had also wanted help with errands and an appointment. Tessa looked at the tour schedule, looked at the distance, thought about the money, then canceled the visit herself. No threat. No punishment, no screaming. She had simply decided that the school probably was not practical after all. I asked whether she really stopped liking it. Her eyes dropped to the table. Not exactly. Those 2 words again. Not exactly. I remembered my own relief when she canceled. I had not forced anything or suggested she skip the trip, but I had been glad when she did. Tessa had heard my discomfort with distance and my parents' willingness to attach money to it, and somewhere between those pressures, the car had cost her afternoons and work hours. The college money had begun costing her choices. I did not give her that interpretation. I asked only whether she wanted the school back on her list. Tessa stared at the laptop. Then she said she did not know. That answer hurt because I believed it. By then, she genuinely did not know which preferences belonged to her and which ones had been shaped by the price attached to them. 3 days later, my parents came to the house. I had not banned them. Not yet. Tessa wanted to see them, and I respected that. Grant did not like it, but he agreed that if they came, one of us would remain nearby, and the visit would be short. Linda arrived carrying enough food for a family twice our size: soup, a casserole, fresh bread, a container of sliced fruit. Her instinct in a crisis had always been to make herself useful. It was one of the things I had loved about her when I was younger. She could not sit comfortably beside grief, but she could clean a kitchen, fold laundry, organize appointments, fill a refrigerator. She set the dishes on the counter and immediately began asking whether Tessa was eating enough. Raymond carried in a small bag from the pharmacy and a new phone charger because he had noticed Tessa's old one was frayed. Those things were real. Their concern was real. That was why the next part was so difficult. Tessa was settled in the living room with pillows behind her. Linda sat beside her, careful not to touch the bruised side of her body. She looked at the wrist brace, and then at the yellowing bruises near Tessa's collarbone. Her face crumpled for a second. She covered it by reaching for the blanket and straightening an edge that did not need straightening. She told Tessa she had scared years off her life. There was no performance in it. Raymond stood awkwardly near the fireplace for several minutes before sitting in the armchair across from her. He asked about pain. He asked when the doctor thought the wrist might be out of the brace. He even apologized for the stupid question about the SUV at the hospital, although what he actually said was that he had been in shock and thinking about the logistics. It was not the apology I wanted, but it was something. For 20 minutes, I could almost imagine we had made the whole problem larger than it was. Then Raymond mentioned the car. He said he had spoken with the insurer and the SUV was almost certainly going to be declared a total loss. Tessa's face changed. Not dramatically. But I saw it. She had been trying not to ask, for all the resentment and fear attached to that vehicle now. It had still been hers in the way teenagers understood ownership. Her first car. Her freedom. Raymond told her not to worry. Once she recovered and was ready to drive again, he could help find another used SUV in the same general range. For a moment, relief crossed her face. That was the danger of generosity. Sometimes it felt exactly like rescue. Then Raymond added, almost casually, "We'd do it the same way. Responsibility still has to mean something." Grant shifted beside me. I felt my own body react before my thoughts caught up. My shoulders tightened. The room had just returned to the beginning. Same car, same rules, same undefined word. Responsibility. I asked my father what he meant by the same way. Raymond seemed surprised that I needed clarification. He said if he purchased another vehicle and continued paying the majority of the insurance, Tessa should continue doing what she had already agreed to do. Help when they needed it. Take care of the car. Keep her grades up. Be available for reasonable family obligations. Linda added that no one expected Tessa to abandon her entire life. She said that as if the fact itself settled everything. Then she glanced toward me. She said the real problem was that I had begun turning every favor into a debate. I felt heat climb into my face. Grant's hand rested on the arm of his chair, fingers curled tightly enough that the knuckles whitened. Tessa watched all of us. That was what stopped me from arguing. I did not want the first real family conversation after her hospital discharge to become 5 adults or near adults, using her as the center of a moral debate. So I asked one question. What did they consider a reasonable family obligation? Raymond answered with examples. If Linda needed a ride and Tessa was free, she helped. If something needed picking up and she was nearby, she helped. If the alternative was time with friends or a part-time shift that could be changed, family came first. Linda agreed that families only worked when people showed up. I had made sacrifices for family too. That was not the problem. The problem was who got to decide whose inconvenience counted. I asked Raymond whether Tessa could say no without the car being threatened. His eyes narrowed slightly. He told me that was the wrong way to think about it. If she repeatedly refused basic responsibilities, then of course he would reconsider whether continuing to provide the vehicle made sense. He called that consequences, the same word I had used with Tessa the morning of the crash. I felt the memory like pressure against my ribs. Tessa looked down at her hands. I did not know whether she had noticed the echo. I had. Linda said no one was trying to control anybody. She reminded us that they had done more for Tessa than many grandparents were able to do. They wanted her to have opportunities. They wanted to help with college too. Then Raymond finally said aloud what until then had been vague. If Tessa believed their help came with too many strings, she was free not to take it. including college. The room went still. There was no contract, trust agreement, or legal threat. Only my father calmly making the exchange explicit. If Tessa thought the strings were too much, she could refuse the help, including college. He believed he was describing a fair choice. That was what made it land. Tessa did not respond. She looked tired. I ended the visit shortly afterward, using her medication schedule as the reason because I did not trust myself to keep the conversation from becoming something worse. Linda kissed Tessa's forehead carefully. Raymond told her to focus on getting stronger. They left the food. They left the charger. They left us with a refrigerator full of evidence that they loved her and a living room full of evidence that their love had terms. Grant waited until their car disappeared down the street before speaking. Tessa had gone to rest in the downstairs bedroom. I was putting containers into the refrigerator because I needed something mechanical to do. Grant leaned against the kitchen counter. He did not ask what I thought anymore. He asked the practical question beneath everything. My parents had talked for years about helping with Tessa's college costs. We had never built our entire plan around it, but we had counted it among the possibilities. Now that possibility had a visible price. Grant looked at me and asked, "Can we actually do this without their money?" I closed the refrigerator door. For the first time since the accident, the question in front of me was not about what my parents had done. It was about what protecting Tessa might cost us, and I did not yet know the answer. Grant's question stayed with me long after he asked it. Can we actually do this without their money? I wanted to answer immediately. Of course we could. Parents found ways, people adjusted. College was important, but it was not worth teaching our daughter that every gift came with a hand around her wrist. That was the answer I wanted to give, because it sounded clean. Real life was not clean. The next morning, after Tessa had eaten half a piece of toast and gone back to sleep, Grant and I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop between us and looked at numbers we already knew in the abstract, but had never forced ourselves to place side by side. Our household income was solid, but not limitless. We had a mortgage, retirement accounts we were still protecting, a little over $40,000 in Tessa's $529, and emergency savings that felt less comfortable after the crash. My parents' informal promise up to $12,000 a year was not enough to erase every college cost, but it was enough to change how much Tessa might need to borrow and which schools felt easy to consider. Grant and I did not need a complicated spreadsheet to reach the conclusion. We could help Tessa go to college without my parents, but it would cost us more from monthly income, tighter choices, perhaps part-time work for Tessa later, perhaps modest loans. Losing their money would not destroy her future. It would make some versions of that future harder. That should have made me more thoughtful. Instead, it made me afraid. Fear after a child nearly dies does not always look like crying. Sometimes it looks like efficiency. I started making lists, follow-up appointments, medication times, school accommodations, transportation, and then I started hovering over ordinary movements. I checked the locks twice. If Grant took her to an appointment, I wanted the route. If she stood too quickly, I was beside her. A car no longer looked like freedom. It looked like impact waiting to happen. A college 5 hours away no longer sounded merely inconvenient. It sounded like a place where she could be hurt before I could reach her. I did not tell her most of those thoughts. That was how I convinced myself I was still being reasonable. But thoughts have a way of shaping behavior before they become words. I was hovering, counting, watching, trying to reduce uncertainty one decision at a time. I knew that. I just did not yet understand where it was leading me. My parents gave me the final push without realizing it. 2 days after their visit, Linda called, while I was folding laundry near the downstairs bedroom. Tessa was asleep, with the door partly open. Grant was at work. My mother wanted to know how Tessa was doing. I gave her a short update. Then Linda asked whether Grant and I had thought any more about what Raymond had said. She meant the car. The college money, the terms. She did not call them terms. She said she hoped we would not turn one terrible accident into a permanent family rupture. I remember standing there with one of Tessa's hoodies folded over my arm. My mother said they had only ever tried to help. She said Raymond was proud of Tessa. She said no one expected obedience. They simply believed that when family invested in a young person, that young person should remember where she came from. The wording was softer than my father's. The meaning was the same. Then Linda said she hoped I would not make Tessa feel as if she had to choose between her parents and her grandparents. That sentence did something to me, because from where I stood, that was exactly what Linda and Raymond had been doing. Car or no car. Money or no money. Near school or far school. Be available or lose the benefit. And yet my mother had managed to place the choice in my hands, as though I were the one creating it. I looked through the open bedroom door. Tessa was asleep on her back, because turning onto her injured side still hurt. Her left wrist rested against a pillow. One foot stuck out from under the blanket because she had always hated sleeping completely covered. I saw the hospital bed, the bruises, the monitor, the surgery doors closing, and something inside me hardened. I stopped thinking about whether Tessa needed time to decide what she wanted. I started thinking that a child who had almost died should not have to decide at all. I told my mother exactly where I stood. As far as I'm concerned, we're done with your money. No replacement car. No more direct deals with Tessa. Linda went quiet. I kept going. I said that until Grant and I believed boundaries were being respected, my parents would not contact Tessa directly to arrange favors or negotiate anything financial with her. In my head, every sentence was protection. My mother tried to interrupt once, but I did not let her. I told her I was done allowing my daughter to be placed in situations where saying no might cost her something she depended on. Linda said I was overreacting. I heard my father in the background. Then Raymond came onto the call. His voice was colder. He asked whether I was speaking for Tessa. That should have stopped me. It did not. I said I was her mother. I said she was 17. I said she was recovering from emergency surgery and did not need to negotiate with two adults about whether she had earned the right to be helped. Raymond listened. Then he said one word. Fine. Not angry. Not pleading. Just fine. If that was how I saw it. He would not buy another car. He would not contribute to college. He would not make arrangements behind my back. He said he would respect the boundary, exactly as I had stated it. I should have heard the warning inside that answer. Instead, I felt relief. For the first time since the crash, one part of the future seemed settled. No leverage. No hidden deal. No endless line of repayment. I had removed the problem. That was how I saw it. When I ended the call, my hands were shaking, but I also felt something dangerously close to pride. I had finally done what Grant had been asking me to do. I had stopped explaining my parents. I had drawn a line. I had protected my daughter. The feeling lasted less than an hour. During that hour, I moved through the house as if decisiveness had made me useful again. I straightened the medication bottles on the counter, answered 2 work emails, and wrote down the time of Tessa's next dose, even though it was already on the schedule taped to the refrigerator. I remember thinking that at least one danger had been removed. My parents could no longer use money to get around me. No one could surprise us with another condition. The relief was physical. My shoulders finally lowered. That was what made the mistake so easy to miss. Control often feels most convincing at the exact moment uncertainty disappears. I had not solved Tessa's problem. I had solved my own discomfort with not knowing what she would choose. Tessa woke around noon. She was stronger than she had been even 3 days earlier, but everything still took time. She moved from the bedroom to the living room, with a pillow held against her ribs, and lowered herself onto the couch carefully. I brought her water. She watched me set it on the table. There was enough history between us. that she noticed when I was carrying something I had not yet said. She asked what happened. I could have delayed. I could have hidden behind the excuse of her recovery. I did neither. Whatever else I had done wrong, I was not going to make decisions about her and then pretend they had happened by themselves. I sat across from her. I told her I had spoken with Grandma and Grandpa. I told her there would be no replacement car from them. I told her I had said we would not accept college money tied to conditions. I told her there would be no more direct arrangements until we knew they could respect her boundaries. I expected anger at my parents. Maybe relief. Maybe silence. What I saw instead was disbelief. Tessa stared at me. Her face had gone very still. She asked whether I had told them she did not want the college money. I said I had told them we were done with it. The word we slipped out before I heard it, she noticed. Her eyes narrowed. You rejected my college help without asking me? The sentence came quietly. That frightened me more than shouting would have. I told her it was not worth what they were doing to her. She shifted on the couch and immediately flinched from the movement. Pain crossed her face, but she pushed through it. She said that was not the point. I tried to explain. The money was not hers yet. There was no account in her name. There was no contract. Grandma and Grandpa had made an informal promise, and I had made clear that we would not let them attach her future to obedience. Everything I said was factually true. None of it answered what she had asked. She listened until I finished. Then she said, "That was supposed to be my decision." I felt something in me resist. Not because she was wrong, because I was still afraid. I told her she was 17. She had just come home from the hospital. She had nearly died because she felt she had to change a work commitment for my mother. I could hear myself building a case. I could hear how persuasive it sounded. If this were happening to someone else's daughter, I would have agreed with every sentence. Tessa looked at me as if I had proved her point. She said she knew what happened. She had been in the car. That shut me up. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the refrigerator motor cycling on in the kitchen. Then Tessa said she had already told me she did not think the arrangement was entirely forced. She had wanted the car. She had accepted help. She had made choices she now understood differently. But they were still her choices. She was allowed to decide whether the college offer had crossed a line she was unwilling to accept. I told her they had been using money to shape where she went to school. She said she knew. I told her Grandma had already caused her to cancel a campus visit. She said she knew that too. I told her Raymond had openly connected money to staying close. Her expression tightened. Then she looked straight at me and said the sentence I would hear in my head for months. They used the car to decide what I should do. You got scared and decided what I should do. Tell me what the difference feels like from where I'm standing. I had no answer. My first instinct was to say there was a huge difference. I loved her. I was protecting her. I was not asking her to repay me. But Tessa had not said our motives were the same. She had asked what the result felt like from where she stood. Another adult using fear and certainty to remove her answer. The room seemed suddenly too warm. I stood because sitting still felt impossible, then immediately regretted it, because Tessa's eyes followed me and I could see her bracing for another lecture. I did not give one. I walked to the kitchen and gripped the edge of the counter. A few minutes later, Grant came home. He knew something was wrong before he put his keys down. Tessa did not make me explain it for her. She told him what I had done. Grant looked at me, then at her. I expected him to support the decision because, in many ways, it was the decision he had wanted. Instead, he looked tired. He sat at the far end of the couch and asked what Tessa wanted now. That question irritated me. Not because it was wrong, because I wished I had asked it first. Tessa said she did not know. She only knew she wanted to be asked. Grant nodded. Then he admitted that he had pushed me toward a hard cutoff after the crash. He said he had been so angry at Linda and Raymond that ending their leverage felt like the obvious answer, but he had not thought enough about the fact that the money represented Tessa's future too. He apologized without turning it into a defense. I watched my husband do in 30 seconds what I was still struggling to do. Acknowledge impact without explaining intent. That stung. Tessa looked from him to me. The anger in her face had shifted into something worse. Exhaustion. She said, "Can one adult stop deciding for me?" That was the moment I understood the size of what had happened. My parents had been using the language of responsibility to keep Tessa available. Grant and I had reacted by using the language of protection to remove decisions from her. The methods were not identical. The reasons were not identical. But Tessa was still standing in the middle of a family where every adult claimed to know what was best for her. I sat down again. This time I did not explain. I told her I was sorry I had made the decision without asking. The apology did not fix it, nor should it have. Tessa looked at me for a long time before saying, "I need you to stop helping for a while." The sentence cut deeper than if she had told me to leave her alone. Helping had always been the language of my motherhood. Helping with homework, helping with rides, helping when she was sick, helping her build applications, helping her solve problems. Now she was asking me to step back from the very thing I had always used to prove that I was there. I asked what that meant. She said she wanted to handle some things herself: school email, college research, communication with her counselor. She did not want me opening her laptop to help organize anything. She did not want every decision turned into a family meeting. She would tell us if she needed something. The old part of me wanted to negotiate exactly how much distance she was asking for and how long it would last. Fear produced reasons before she had even finished speaking. Then I looked at her healing incision, broken ribs, injured wrist, and understood how easily "she almost died" could become permanent permission to control everything. So I said okay. Not gracefully, not confidently, but I said it. The following week taught me what emotional distance actually looked like. It was not slammed doors. It was not screaming. Tessa still said good morning. She still asked me to bring her tea when she was too tired to stand. She still let me drive her to medical appointments because she could not drive. But the small openings disappeared. She began answering school emails herself. When the counselor called about adjusting assignments during recovery, Tessa asked Grant to sit nearby rather than me. She spent time on her laptop and closed it when I came into the room. Not dramatically, just automatically. Before the crash, she had occasionally shown me college websites while we sat at the kitchen island. Now I saw only the glow of the screen from across the room. Once, I passed the dining table and noticed a notebook filled with school names and numbers. She turned the page over before I could read it. I kept walking. That was harder than I want to admit. There were moments when I almost convinced myself that her privacy was dangerous. She had already hidden things once. She had already allowed my parents to reshape her schedule without telling us. Surely that justified more supervision. Then I remembered the look on her face. Tell me what the difference feels like from where I'm standing. At night, Grant and I talked quietly after Tessa went to sleep. He told me he thought giving her space was the right thing. I asked whether he was worried we were going too far in the other direction. Of course he was. That was the part no one tells you about changing how you parent. Realizing one kind of control is wrong does not automatically tell you what the right amount of guidance looks like. There was no clean line. Only judgment, trust, risk, and the uncomfortable knowledge that children became adults, partly by making choices their parents would not have made. One afternoon, I heard Tessa laughing with Grant in the kitchen. It was the first full laugh I had heard from her since the crash. The sound stopped me in the hallway. I should have been relieved. Instead, something inside me hurt. Not because she was laughing with her father, because I realized she had not laughed like that with me in days. I stood outside the kitchen, where neither of them could see me. Grant was telling her something about a technician at work who had installed a thermostat upside down. Tessa was holding her ribs and telling him to stop, because laughing still hurt. It was ordinary, warm, exactly what I had wanted her recovery to include. And I was outside it. That was when the second loss became real. At the hospital, I had sat beneath fluorescent lights wondering whether my daughter would survive long enough for me to bring her home. Now she was home. She was alive. She was healing. And for the first time in 17 years, I could feel her beginning to build a part of her life where I was not automatically invited. I had wanted to save her from my parents' control. Instead, I had frightened her into protecting her choices from me. The crash had almost taken my daughter's life. My fear of another loss was beginning to cost me something different. Her trust. For several days after Tessa told me she needed me to stop helping, I learned how loud restraint could feel. She did not shut herself in the downstairs bedroom or stop speaking to me. Physically, she still needed rides to appointments and help with things her injured wrist made awkward. But school, college emails, and decisions became hers unless she invited me in. She answered what I asked, without volunteering the small details she once would have shared. One morning I saw her at the dining table with her laptop, a notebook, and an application portal open. Before the crash, I would have pulled out a chair and begun asking questions. Instead, I carried a basket of laundry past her. She glanced up, noticed that I kept walking, and returned to the screen. The distance between us was not dramatic enough to call broken. It felt more like waiting. I had taught her that my fear could become a reason to take over, and she had responded by reducing the chances for me to do it again. It was not punishment. It was the space I had forced her to need. The question of my parents' college offer hung over us for nearly a week. I had told Linda and Raymond that, as far as I was concerned, we were done with their money. Raymond had accepted that immediately. At the time, I had felt decisive. Now, every time I remembered Tessa's face when I told her, I heard the arrogance inside my own wording. As far as I'm concerned, the whole problem was that too many people in Tessa's life had begun speaking as if their concern automatically gave them the right to decide. I did not know whether my parents still considered their college promise open. I did not ask. That was no longer mine to solve. Tessa did. She came to me one evening after dinner, when Grant was cleaning up the kitchen and I was sitting at the table sorting a stack of insurance statements. I had no intention of reading that night. She lowered herself carefully into the chair across from me. Her ribs were improving, but quick movements still hurt. Her wrist remained supported, and she had become skilled at doing almost everything one-handed. She looked at the papers, then at me. I waited. That alone was progress. Tessa said she wanted to talk to Grandma and Grandpa about college. My body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders tightened. I imagined Linda pushing guilt into every silence. I imagined Raymond turning tuition into a price list for obedience. I imagined Tessa walking away from the conversation more confused than before. I wanted to tell her there was nothing left to discuss. Instead, I asked what she wanted from the conversation. Tessa said she wanted to know whether the offer still existed, if she was the one making the decision. Then she said, quietly but firmly, "You don't get to reject it for me." I felt the instinct to explain. It rose so quickly I almost gave in. I wanted to say I had already admitted I was wrong. I wanted to say the offer was manipulative. I wanted to say hearing the terms again would not make them healthier. I wanted to say I knew my parents better than she did. All of those things might have contained some truth. None of them changed what she was asking for. So I told her she was right. The words did not come easily. I admitted that I had overstepped. Tessa studied my face as if she was checking whether an argument was hidden behind the apology. Then she said she wanted me there when she talked to them. That surprised me. I had expected her to demand privacy. Instead, she said she wanted me to listen, not answer for her, not translate what she meant, not jump in if I hated something they said, just listen. I asked whether she was sure. She nodded. That was the arrangement. And because I had spent the previous week learning how damaging it could be when adults silently changed the terms of an agreement, I repeated it back exactly. She would ask the questions. I would be present. I would not answer for her. The next day, Tessa contacted Linda herself. I was not beside her when she made the call. I did not listen from the hallway or ask to see her messages afterward. Later, Tessa told me only what mattered. She had asked whether the original college offer still stood, if she was the one deciding whether to accept it. Linda said yes. Raymond was less enthusiastic, but he agreed to one conversation. That detail mattered. The offer was not something I had magically restored. I had tried to reject it on Tessa's behalf. Tessa had chosen to reopen the question herself. Whatever happened next had to begin there. My parents came to our house that Saturday afternoon. By then, Tessa could move around the first floor without someone hovering beside her, though she still tired quickly. The color had returned to her face. The worst bruising had started fading from purple to yellow along the edges. I watched my mother notice all of it when she walked in. Linda's eyes went immediately to Tessa's wrist, then to the way she held one arm close to her ribs. Concern crossed her face before she covered it with a smile. Raymond carried nothing this time. No groceries. No pharmacy bag. No replacement charger. That made the visit feel different from the one before. This was not caregiving. It was negotiation. We sat in the living room. Grant took the chair beside me but slightly back from the center of the room. He had agreed to the same rule I had. Tessa led. Before anyone could begin the usual softening conversation, she said she wanted to be clear about one thing. She looked at my parents, then at me. Mom can listen. I'm asking the questions. Linda's eyebrows lifted slightly. Raymond gave one short nod. I said nothing. The silence felt unnatural inside me. That was the point. Tessa began with the simplest version of what she wanted to know. If Grandma and Grandpa helped with college, what exactly did they expect from her? Not what they hoped. Not what they would prefer. What did they expect? My mother started by saying they did not want anything unreasonable. Raymond agreed. That word reasonable had become dangerous to me, because I had finally understood that in my family, it often meant whatever the person with the money had already decided. Tessa did not challenge it. She waited. My father explained first. He said he and Linda had always intended to help with a public university education if the school made financial sense and if Tessa remained connected to the family. He did not say she had to live at home. He did not say she could never leave Wisconsin. The conditions appeared one at a time. The school should be within what he considered a reasonable driving distance. Tessa should come home regularly. If Linda or Raymond genuinely needed help, she should make an effort to be available. They expected to remain involved in major decisions if they were contributing significant money. None of Raymond's conditions sounded monstrous by themselves. Plenty of families expected college students to come home, remember grandparents, and listen to people helping with tuition. The tension came from the undefined words: reasonable distance, regular visits, genuine family need. The same people controlling the money would decide later what each one meant. Tessa asked how often regularly meant. Raymond said that depended. She asked how far was too far. He said that also depended. She asked what counted as a family need important enough for her to change plans. Again, the answer was flexible. No fixed rule, no boundary, no finish line. I watched Tessa understand something I had already begun seeing. The money was specific, up to $12,000 a year. The obligations were not. Raymond could define them later. That was the same problem as the car. The benefit had a number. The debt did not. Tessa did not look shocked by that realization. She looked tired. Her good hand rested flat against her thigh, while the fingers of the injured one flexed once against the pillow. I knew that movement by then. Stiffness bothered her when she sat too long. Yet, she did not ask to stop the conversation. She had spent months adjusting herself around rules that changed in private, and now she was making the adults name those rules in front of one another. Watching her do it was uncomfortable, because it exposed how little drama control actually needed. Nobody in the room was shouting. No one was threatening to disown her. The leverage lived in calm sentences about what made sense, followed by the quiet knowledge that thousands of dollars could disappear if her definition of a reasonable life differed from Raymond's. Tessa rested her injured wrist against a pillow beside her. She was quiet for several seconds. Linda used the pause. She said the entire conversation had become much more hostile than it needed to be because I had panicked after the accident. I felt my spine stiffen. Tessa glanced at me. I knew what she was watching for. Linda continued. She said I had always reacted badly when I could not control what was happening around me. Then she said, "Your mother panics when she can't control something." The sentence hit because it contained truth. I had panicked after the crash, hovered over Tessa, and tried to end the college arrangement without asking her. Linda was using a real failure to defend a different kind of control, and every part of me wanted to interrupt, explain the difference, and remind everyone about the message telling Tessa not to involve me. Then I remembered the condition Tessa had set. Mom can listen. I'm asking the questions. So I pressed my thumb against the seam of my jeans and stayed silent. It felt terrible. That did not make it wrong. Linda looked at Tessa and added that, whatever mistakes they had made, at least she and Raymond had treated her as someone capable of making an agreement. I saw the effect immediately. Not agreement, recognition. Because that was one of the things Tessa had been trying to tell me from the hospital bed. She had wanted the car. She had knowingly accepted some conditions. She did not want the story rewritten as if she had never participated. Linda knew exactly where that wound was. But Tessa did not turn toward me and accuse me again. She also did not defend my parents. She asked another question. If she chose a school farther away than they wanted, would the money disappear? Raymond leaned back in the armchair. His expression changed. Not anger. Calculation. He asked which school she meant. Tessa told him. The Northern Wisconsin University, whose summer tour she had canceled, was back on her list. So was another public university even farther away. I did not know about the second one. That fact entered me like cold air. I kept my face still. Raymond now had the information directly from Tessa. There would be no later question about how he knew. He asked how far away the second school was. Tessa told him. Almost 5 hours depending on weather and traffic. My father's jaw tightened. He said that was not what he and Linda had in mind when they offered to help. Tessa asked why. Raymond said they were not interested in paying for a college experience that removed her from the family most of the year. He talked about practical things. Travel, weather, emergencies, the difficulty of coming home regularly. Then the financial logic appeared again. If they were contributing tens of thousands of dollars over 4 years, they believed they had a legitimate interest in how that investment affected the family. Investment. I saw Tessa hear the word. She did not react immediately. She asked whether that meant the distant schools were off limits. Raymond said no. She was free to apply anywhere she wanted. Then he said, "You may just be choosing without our money." The sentence was calmer than a threat. That made it more powerful. There it was. Freedom and price, placed side by side. Tessa looked at Linda. My mother did not contradict him. She softened the wording, saying they only wanted Tessa to think carefully about what mattered. But she did not say the money would remain unconditional. There were no more questions after that. Not because the conflict was solved, but because Tessa had heard the offer, its limits, and its price directly. Most important, she had heard all of it without me interpreting the conversation for her. My parents left before dinner. Linda hugged Tessa carefully. Raymond told her there was time to think. He did not pressure her for an answer. In his mind, I think he believed the numbers would eventually make the decision for her. I did not know that because I could read his thoughts. I knew it because of the way he tapped one finger against the arm of the chair every time the amount of college help came up, and because I had watched him treat numbers as arguments my entire life. After the door closed, Grant went to the kitchen. I stayed in the living room with Tessa. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I was proud of her, worried about her, angry with my parents, ashamed of myself, still afraid. All of those things existed at once. Tessa looked exhausted. I should have let the silence remain. Instead, fear got there first. I asked about the second school. She said she had been looking at it for a few days. I asked whether she had really thought through the distance. She said yes. I pictured November snow, 5-hour drives, a flat tire 2 counties away, a phone call from a hospital I could not reach quickly, her body behind an ER curtain. I heard myself say, "That's almost 5 hours away." Tessa's face changed instantly. The openness that had been there during the conversation with my parents disappeared. Her shoulders tightened. She gave me the same look she had given me that morning before the crash when I reminded her to text me. Then she said, "Here we go." 3 words. I wanted to say she misunderstood me, that 5 hours was objectively far, that after County M distance meant something different. But I had just watched my father explain why his fear, his money, and his definition of responsibility entitled him to shape Tessa's future. I wanted her close for a different reason. I had seen what could happen when I could not protect her, but the result could become the same. The next fight was somewhere harder to escape. Inside me. Inside me. For the next several days, I tried to convince myself that 5 hours was objectively too far. My mind supplied winter roads, flat tires, emergencies, another unknown number calling from a hospital. Every time I pictured Tessa driving north, it skipped the ordinary parts and went straight to County M. The ER curtain, her immobilized wrist, the surgeon with his cap folded in one hand. I knew fear was doing that. Knowing did not stop it. Tessa did not bring up the schools again, and neither did I. The silence between us was different now. She had just proved she could ask my parents direct questions without me speaking for her, and within minutes I had nearly turned the conversation back into what made me comfortable. So I began watching myself. If she mentioned a school, my mind produced safety before curiosity. If she talked about returning to work, I thought about fatigue before what the job gave her. When she said her wrist was improving, I wondered how soon she would ask to drive. The reasons were often sensible, which made them hard to recognize as fear. My parents had rarely said they were afraid of losing influence either. They said something was too expensive, too far, poorly timed, not responsible. I had spent most of my life respecting those words. One Thursday evening, I was standing in the laundry room folding towels, when a memory I had not thought about in years came back with almost embarrassing clarity. It began with a college brochure, not digital. Paper, glossy pages, thick enough to feel important. Spring of 2003. I was 18. I had been accepted to a college several hours from Madison. Not an elite school, not some impossible dream. Just a place I had visited once with a teacher, and liked immediately. The campus had older brick buildings and a library with tall windows. I remember standing outside that library thinking that no one there knew who I was. At 18, that had felt like freedom. I had wanted to study operations and business systems even before I knew exactly what kind of career that might become. I liked structure. I liked figuring out how things moved from one place to another, and why some systems worked while others wasted time and money. The school had a good program. More importantly, it was far enough from home that I would have to build a life there. I had kept the acceptance packet on my dresser for days before telling my parents. At night, I would open it and study the campus map, tracing the route from the residence halls to the library with one finger as if I were already learning my way around. I had imagined mundane things more than dramatic ones. Buying my own groceries, calling home because I wanted to rather than because I was expected to, finding a place to study where nobody knew whether I had been a good daughter that week. None of those wishes meant I hated my parents. I loved them. I simply wanted to discover what my decisions sounded like before someone else evaluated them. That was the part of 18-year-old me I had forgotten when I later turned the choice into a story about saving money. I remembered bringing the acceptance letter into our kitchen. My mother had been cooking. My father was sitting at the table with the newspaper folded beside him. They were proud at first. I had forgotten that part. Linda hugged me. Raymond asked about tuition. Then, housing. Then, travel. By dinner, the acceptance had become a problem to be solved. There was another school closer to home that had also admitted me. Less travel, easier weekends, less expensive overall. My parents had already decided they preferred it. The argument did not happen in one dramatic night. That was the part I had rewritten over the years. I had remembered the ending and lost the process. My parents never said, "You are forbidden to go." They said, "We can help if you choose wisely." They said, "You are old enough to understand money." They said, "Why pay more to be farther away when there is a good school closer?" My father eventually made the terms plain. If I chose the farther school, I would be responsible for much more of the cost myself. He was willing to help significantly if I attended the closer one. If I wanted the expensive choice, he said, I was old enough to pay for it. I remembered being angry. I remembered crying in my bedroom afterward. I remembered telling myself I did not need them. Then I sat with the numbers. Tuition, housing, books, work hours, loans, and fear. Not fear of leaving. Fear of making a choice my parents had defined as irresponsible and then failing. In the end, I chose the closer school. I had told people it was sensible. The decision did not arrive with anyone forcing a pen into my hand. That was why I had been able to call it mine for so long. I remember sitting with my mother at the kitchen table while she compared the two schools on a yellow legal pad. She never said I would disappoint her if I left. She simply circled the cheaper number and reminded me how much easier it would be to come home on weekends. Raymond did not forbid the farther school either. He only made sure I understood which choice would receive his help. By the time I mailed the deposit to the closer campus, I had repeated their reasoning enough that it sounded like my own voice. I even felt proud of being practical. Years later, that pride had made it difficult to recognize the same mechanism when Tessa used almost identical language. For 23 years, that was the story I repeated. I made the practical choice. I saved money. I stayed close to family. It worked out. All of those things were true. I had met Grant years later, built a good career, built a good life. There was no tragic alternate future waiting inside that acceptance letter. That was why I had never examined the decision closely. A choice did not have to ruin your life to stop being entirely yours. I stood in the laundry room with a folded towel in my hands and realized I had spent more than 2 decades calling a decision shaped by my parents' money, a decision that came only from me. The similarity to Tessa was so obvious once I saw it that I had to sit down. She had canceled a campus tour. I had given up an entire college choice. She had told herself staying closer might make sense. So had I. In both cases, money made the farther option feel less like preference and more like irresponsibility. I had spent 23 years telling people my decision was sensible because, in many ways, it had been. I saved money. I built a career. My life was not ruined by choosing the closer school. That was precisely why I had never examined the pressure closely. A choice did not have to destroy your future to stop being entirely yours. The language was familiar. Responsibility, gratitude, practicality, family. I had inherited those words before Tessa was born, and handed some of them to her because I believed them. I thought again about the morning of the crash. Being independent means proving you can handle the consequences, and heard how close my language had come to Raymond's. That did not make me my father. It made it impossible to pretend I had grown up untouched by him. Grant found me there. He had come home from work and apparently called my name twice before walking down the hallway. He stood in the laundry room doorway, still in his work clothes, and took one look at my face. Then he sat on the floor opposite me because there was nowhere else to sit. I told him about 2003. Not every detail. Just enough. The school. The money. My father's terms. The choice I had always called sensible. Grant listened. He did not tell me my parents had manipulated me. I was grateful for that. The word would have made me defensive. Instead, he asked whether I would have chosen the closer school if both options had cost me the same. I opened my mouth, then stopped. I did not know. That was the point. For 23 years, I had behaved as if I did know. Grant leaned his head back against the cabinet. He said fear made people reach for certainty. Money could do that. Parenthood could too. He reminded me that after Tessa's crash, his first instinct had been to remove every risk he could find. My parents, the car, driving, distance. He had wanted to make the world smaller, until nothing could reach her. I understood that instinct so completely it hurt. I said I still believed the faraway school was risky. Grant nodded. Then he said the sentence I needed, because it did not tell me to stop being afraid. It gave the fear somewhere to go. Protecting someone doesn't mean making the safest choice for them. Sometimes it means giving them the courage to make a choice you're afraid of. I looked at him. Part of me wanted to argue that college involved real money, travel, weather, and risk. Grant was not denying any of that. He was telling me fear could be information without becoming authority, and that standing beside a choice was different from making it. That night, I did not rush downstairs and deliver a speech to Tessa. I had learned enough by then to understand that insight did not automatically earn access. She was doing homework at the dining table when I passed through the kitchen. Her wrist brace was still on, but she could use her fingers more easily now. Her notebook was open beside the laptop. I saw college names written across the top of a page. I did not read them. I made tea. Then I went upstairs. The apology came 2 days later. Not because I had planned a perfect moment. Because Tessa and I ended up alone in the kitchen after Grant left early for work. She was making oatmeal one-handed and getting irritated with the lid on the container. My old instinct was to take it from her. Instead, I held the container steady while she opened it herself. That small act gave me the courage to say the larger thing. I told her I had been thinking about what happened after the crash, about my parents, about myself. Tessa did not turn toward me immediately. She poured oats into a bowl. I told her I had no right to reject the college offer for her. I had already apologized for that once. This time I explained less. I told her that I understood something new. My parents had taught me that support and influence naturally came together. I had accepted that for so long that I had passed part of it to her without realizing it. Then I said, I taught you where gratitude starts. I never taught you where it ends. Tessa stopped measuring the milk. She looked at me. I told her I was sorry. Not because I had wanted her to be grateful, because I had helped make it harder for her to recognize when gratitude had become fear. And because after I finally saw the problem, I had panicked and taken another choice from her. Tessa was quiet long enough that I could feel my body preparing to fill the silence. I did not. Eventually, she said she believed me. That was not forgiveness wrapped in a hug. It was simply belief. I had told the truth. She accepted that I meant it. Then she went back to breakfast. The distance between us did not disappear. But something changed. Later that afternoon, she left her laptop open when she went to get water. I did not look at the screen. When she came back and saw me sitting nearby, she did not close it. That was how trust returned. Not as an announcement. as a series of small decisions not to protect ourselves from each other. My parents did not contact us for several days after the college conversation. That silence was unusual for Linda. Before the crash, she rarely went more than 2 days without checking in on Tessa. Now I suspected she was waiting for Raymond. Or Raymond was waiting for the numbers to do what he believed numbers always did. I did not know. I did not ask. The call came on a Tuesday evening. Tessa was sitting at the kitchen island with a heating pad against her ribs after spending too long on a school assignment. Grant was cleaning up after dinner. My phone rang. "Dad?" I looked at Tessa. She saw the name on the screen. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she said I could answer. I put the call on speaker because the subject belonged to her too. Raymond did not waste time. He said he had thought about the conversation. He had also spoken with Linda. If Tessa intended to keep schools nearly 5 hours away on her list, then the original college offer no longer applied. The words were formal in a way that made the informality of the original promise almost absurd. There had never been a contract, yet the withdrawal sounded like one. Up to $12,000 a year had hovered over Tessa's future for years. Now it was gone in less than a minute. Raymond said they had offered help because they wanted to remain part of her life. If she chose a path that made that relationship impractical, he did not see why they should finance it. Tessa's face had gone pale. Not shocked. She had known this was possible. Knowing did not make hearing it painless. I watched her thumb move back and forth along the edge of the heating pad. Grant stood perfectly still beside the sink. My father waited. Old habits rose inside me. Explain, negotiate, find a compromise. Tell him she had not chosen a school yet. Ask whether applications really justified withdrawing everything. Remind him how much Tessa loved them. Make him understand. For most of my life, conflict with my parents ended because I worked until I found a version of my needs they could tolerate. I almost did it again. Then I looked at Tessa. This was not my offer, not my decision, not my relationship to manage. I said only, "That is your choice." My father was silent. I think he had expected resistance. He asked whether I was really going to leave it at that. I said yes. There was nothing else to discuss. The offer had been his. The conditions had been his. Removing it was his choice. I did not thank him. I did not insult him. I did not ask him to reconsider. Raymond said goodnight and ended the call. The kitchen seemed larger after his voice disappeared. Tessa stared at my phone. $48,000. Not in an account, not legally owed, but real enough that we had all pictured it as part of the road ahead. Gone. I waited for Tessa to speak. She did not. Grant came around the island and sat beside her. She leaned into him carefully, avoiding her healing ribs. I wanted to go to her too. I stopped myself. A second later, Tessa held out her good hand toward me. I took it. We stayed like that without talking. The money was gone. The strange thing was that, beneath the fear, I felt something I had not expected. Not relief exactly. Space. For the first time, my father's money was no longer sitting inside every future decision waiting to cast a vote. That freedom was going to cost us. I knew that. Tessa knew it. Grant knew it. But when I went upstairs that night, I did something I had almost never managed after a serious disagreement with my parents. I did not call back. I did not send a message explaining myself more clearly. I did not ask my mother to soften him. I did not lie awake rehearsing the words that might make Raymond understand. The money was gone, and for the first time in my life, I let one of my father's choices remain his consequence, instead of making it my job to repair it. The morning after my father withdrew the college money, nothing looked different. The sun still came through the kitchen windows. Grant still left his coffee mug beside the sink, and Tessa still had school assignments open on her laptop. $48,000 had disappeared from our assumptions, and the refrigerator still hummed. If losing the money had ruined us, anger would have been simple. If we were wealthy enough not to care, freedom would have been cheap. We were somewhere in the middle, where principle had to live beside arithmetic. Grant and I waited until Tessa was ready before opening the numbers again. This time, we did it differently. No decisions made in another room. No adults talking about her future while she slept. Tessa sat with us. We spread out only what mattered, the balance in her 529 account, what Grant and I could reasonably contribute from income, what public universities cost, what kinds of financial aid were possible, and what a modest amount of borrowing might look like if she chose a school that required it. I resisted the urge to turn the conversation into a lecture. Grant did too. That sounds like a small achievement. It was not. For years, we had been parents because we knew more. Now Tessa was reaching an age where knowing more did not automatically mean deciding more. The numbers were not catastrophic. They were just narrower. Some schools that had felt comfortable now required planning. Some required sacrifice. Some might still be possible, with aid we had not yet calculated. Tessa could keep working part-time once she was physically ready, but none of us wanted her carrying an unreasonable number of hours just to prove independence. There would be choices, that was the point. Not limitless choices. Real ones. When we finished, Tessa sat back and stared at the legal pad where Grant had written 3 possible paths. Her face was calm. Too calm. I knew that look. It was the expression she wore when she was trying to convince herself that something did not matter enough to hurt. She said she understood. Then she closed the notebook. I thought the conversation was over. It was not. She looked at me and said, "I hate that they can make saying no this expensive." There was no defiance in it. That was what made the sentence stay. Tessa was not celebrating freedom. She was grieving the price. For weeks, I had wanted her to recognize that my parents' help had conditions. Now she did. And recognition did not make the money stop being useful. It did not make the SUV less valuable. It did not make tuition cheaper. It did not erase the part of her that still wanted Grandma and Grandpa to simply say they loved her enough to help without needing control in return. I moved my hand across the table, then stopped before touching hers. That was another habit I was learning to notice. Comfort could become something you imposed if you never checked whether it was wanted. Tessa saw the movement. She placed her hand over mine herself. We sat there without trying to improve the feeling. That became the pattern of November. Our life did not become dramatic. It became tighter in ordinary ways. We postponed a home project, cut discretionary spending, and let the bakery wait until Tessa was physically ready. We talked about aid, public universities, part-time work, and manageable borrowing without turning any of it into a miracle plan. The important change was that Tessa could see routes around my parents' money. They were not painless routes, but they existed, and that changed how much power the withdrawn offer held. The medical side of Tessa's recovery changed too. By late November, her wrist had improved enough that the rigid support was no longer the constant presence it had been. Her ribs still ached if she laughed too hard or moved abruptly. The abdominal incision had healed well, though fatigue surprised her some afternoons. Her doctors were satisfied. She was impatient. That was probably the healthiest thing about her. She wanted her old life back faster than her body was willing to give it. The car remained the one subject she avoided. For weeks, nobody pushed. Grant drove her where she needed to go. I did the same. Friends picked her up occasionally. At first I thought she appreciated not having to discuss it. Then I noticed she never sat in the front passenger seat if she could avoid it. She preferred the back. At intersections, her body changed before her face did. Her shoulders lifted slightly. Her hand tightened around the seatbelt. If another vehicle moved too quickly into view, she stopped talking. I knew better than to call attention to every reaction. Fear watched too closely becomes performance. So I waited. In late November, after one of her follow-up appointments, Tessa told me the doctor had cleared her to begin driving again when she felt ready. The sentence made my stomach drop. I hated that. I hated that my first response to good news was terror. I managed to say only that we could take it slowly. Tessa nodded. For 2 days, nothing happened. Then, on a cold Saturday morning, she walked into the kitchen wearing sneakers and said she wanted to try. Grant was at work. That left me. For one selfish second, I wished he were home. I wanted someone calmer. Someone who did not still hear County M every time Tessa reached for car keys. Then I understood why it had to be me. We took Grant's vehicle because it was the one Tessa knew best after the SUV. The sky was pale and flat, the kind of Wisconsin morning that made everything look drained of color. There was no snow yet, only cold air and damp pavement. I chose a quiet route through our neighborhood, without saying I had chosen it. Tessa noticed anyway. She did not comment. She adjusted the seat. Mirrors. Seat belt. Hands at the wheel. Every movement was familiar and wrong at the same time. I sat in the passenger seat and tried not to grip the door handle. She started the engine. Nothing terrible happened. We backed out. Nothing happened. She drove slowly past houses she had seen every day of her life. A man walked a dog. Someone had already put up Christmas lights before Thanksgiving decorations were fully gone. A delivery van blocked half a driveway. Ordinary world. Ordinary road. For 5 minutes, I almost believed this would be easier than we feared. Then we reached an intersection. Not the intersection. Just one. A sedan approached from the left. It had plenty of time to stop. It did stop. Tessa stopped too. She did not move when the road cleared. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. I waited. A car behind us was still far enough away that there was no immediate pressure. Tessa's breathing changed. Shallow. Fast. I said her name softly. She shook her head. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead. The light had not changed, because there was no light. Just a stop sign. An ordinary 4-way intersection. She whispered, "I can't." For 1 second, I saw the intersection through 2 different versions of time. In the present, the sedan to our left was stopped exactly where it should be. A bare tree moved slightly in the wind beyond the corner. The road ahead was empty. In my body, though, I was back in the hospital hearing words like internal bleeding and emergency surgery. I could see from Tessa's face that her body was somewhere else too. Her shoulders had risen nearly to her ears. A pulse moved quickly at the side of her neck. She was not refusing because she had forgotten how to drive. She was sitting inside the collision again while the rest of the street remained ordinary around us. There was nothing I could say that would make those 2 realities merge on command. The old instincts arrived together. One said, "If she stops now, the fear wins. Tell her to breathe. Tell her she is safe. Tell her to go." The other said, "Get her out of the driver's seat. Never make her do this again. You almost lost her once." Those 2 instincts looked opposite. They came from the same place. My need to decide what fear was allowed to mean for her. I looked at Tessa's hands. White knuckles, healing wrist. The girl who had spent months being told that responsibility meant pushing through whatever other people needed from her. Then I heard her words. "I can't. Not I'll never drive again. Not I'm giving up. Just, I can't. Right now." I said, "Okay." That was all. No speech, no lesson, no challenge. I turned on the hazard lights and told her we could switch when she was ready. Tessa stayed still for nearly a minute. Then she nodded. We changed seats safely. I drove home. She stared out the window. I did not tell her it was progress. I did not tell her next time would be easier. I did not promise anything. When we pulled into the driveway, she sat for another few seconds before opening the door. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were wet, though she had not cried. She said she had thought I was going to make her keep going. I understood why. That hurt. I told her I almost had. A small smile appeared. Not because the answer was funny, because it was true. We went inside. The next time she tried driving was not for another 2 weeks. That time she made it through 3 intersections. Progress did not arrive as a victory montage. It arrived like that. 3 intersections, then 5. Then a short trip to the bakery parking lot after closing. The first time she parked there again, she sat behind the wheel and looked through the windshield at the darkened windows. I knew what she was remembering. The shift she had never reached. The text that said she would be late. I did not ask. By early December, my mother had started trying to reach me more often. Not Tessa, me. That distinction mattered because we had made one rule clear after the crash. No direct financial negotiations, requests, or pressure on Tessa without going through us first. Linda had complained about it. She followed it. At first her calls were ordinary. How was Tessa's wrist? Was she back at school? Was she driving yet? Then the questions changed. Had Tessa applied to the northern school? Had she decided how far she really wanted to go? Did she understand how much out-of-state or distant living could cost even at a public university? I answered only what Tessa had agreed I could share. That frustrated Linda. I could hear it in the way she exhaled before changing subjects. Raymond did not call at all. According to my mother, he considered the matter settled. He had made an offer. Tessa had chosen to keep distant schools. He had withdrawn the offer. In his mind, that was fairness, nothing personal. My mother was different. Distance had begun doing something to her. Before the crash, she could assume Tessa would remain woven into her life. Sunday dinners, errands, quick visits, calls. A granddaughter 30 minutes away. Now, the possibility of Tessa leaving for college had become real in a way it had not before. Linda started talking about time, how fast childhood had gone, how strange the house would feel if Tessa moved far away, how she and Raymond were getting older. None of Linda's feelings were hard to understand. Tessa might leave, the house would be quieter, and the grandmother who had assumed regular access could become someone invited only when Tessa chose. The fear was human. The problem was what Linda tried to demand from Tessa because of it. One evening, Linda said she did not want to lose Tessa over money. I stood at the kitchen sink looking out at the dark backyard while she spoke. For a moment, I almost believed we were approaching something new. Then she asked whether Tessa really needed to go so far away to become independent. There it was, softened, but still there. I did not argue. I asked what she wanted from me. My mother hesitated. Then she said Raymond might be willing to make another offer. I stopped drying the plate in my hands. The original offer was gone. That mattered. I did not let her pretend otherwise. I reminded her that Raymond had formally withdrawn the 4-year college promise after Tessa put distant schools back on the list. Linda said she knew. This would be different. A compromise. Raymond was willing to contribute significantly toward Tessa's first year and help buy another used car once she was ready to drive regularly again. Not the old 4-year commitment, something narrower, but there would still be expectations. Of course there would. I asked Linda to tell me the broad terms. She said the school needed to be nearby. Tessa needed to remain available to family. Regular visits. Reasonable help. The familiar language. I closed my eyes. It was the same transaction wearing smaller numbers. But I had learned enough by then not to reject it. Not for Tessa. I told Linda that if she and Raymond wanted Tessa to hear a new offer, I would ask whether Tessa wanted to hear it. My mother sounded surprised. Maybe she expected anger. Maybe she expected relief. She got neither. I told her I would not sell the offer to Tessa, and I would not answer it for her. Linda said that was fine. I did not know whether she meant it. I only knew what I would do. That evening, after dinner, I told Tessa. I kept my voice neutral. Grandma had called. Raymond was apparently willing to make a new proposal. It was not the original offer. First-year help. A replacement used car. Conditions about choosing a nearby school and remaining regularly involved. Tessa listened without interrupting. Her expression gave me almost nothing. When I finished, I asked whether she wanted to hear the proposal directly. I did not ask whether she wanted to accept. That difference mattered. Tessa looked down at the notebook beside her. The page held 3 school names. I recognized the Northern Wisconsin school, the second distant one, and a university much closer to Madison. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she asked how much money. I told her what Linda had said. Approximately $12,000 toward the first year, plus help with a used car. Tessa inhaled slowly. That was enough to tell me the offer mattered. Of course it did. $12,000 mattered. A car mattered. She was 17, not a saint. For the first time, I was glad she did not immediately dismiss it. If she had shouted that she did not need anything from them, I would have worried that anger was deciding for her. Instead, she sat with it. She asked whether I thought the conditions were fair. It was the question I had once wanted her to ask me. Now I understood why I could not answer it first. I told her I had an opinion. She almost smiled. Then I said I would give it if she wanted it. Tessa looked at me for a long moment. Not yet, she said. So I waited. A few minutes later, she asked whether Grandma and Grandpa would come to our house. I said we could arrange that. She nodded. Then she said, I want them to hear my answer from me. Something in the way she said it told me she was not asking for courage anymore. She was preparing to use her own. And this time, I was not going to take the decision away from her before she had the chance. The final meeting happened on a Sunday afternoon in early December. By early December, Tessa could move around the house without thinking about every step. Her wrist still stiffened in the cold. Her ribs reminded her of the crash if she twisted too fast, and driving remained something she approached in pieces rather than something she had fully reclaimed. She asked that the final meeting happen at our house, somewhere familiar and easy to leave if she needed to. The living room had already held arguments about the car and responsibility, but that Sunday it looked ordinary. There was no food from Linda, no gift from Raymond, nothing that could blur the purpose of the visit. Tessa had told Grant and me beforehand that she did not want a trial of every favor from the past year. She did not need her grandparents to confess to every mistake or agree with every interpretation. She wanted to hear the new offer once and answer it. For 17 years, I had thought motherhood meant preparing my daughter to speak. That afternoon it meant knowing when she already could and refusing to take the microphone back. Tessa chose the end of the couch. Grant sat beside me across from her, slightly farther back. Linda took the chair nearest Tessa. Raymond sat opposite her. No food, no gifts, no replacement phone charger, no casserole. That was good. Generosity had complicated enough conversations in our family. Tessa had told Grant and me before they arrived that she wanted to answer for herself. We agreed. She also said she did not want the meeting to become a trial about every favor from the previous year. She had already understood what happened. She did not need Raymond to confess that the car arrangement became unfair. She did not need Linda to admit every moment of guilt. What she wanted was simpler. She wanted to hear the final offer once, then answer it. I had spent 17 years believing motherhood meant preparing a child to speak. That day, motherhood meant learning how not to speak when she already could. Raymond began. He did not waste time trying to repair the emotional history first. That was very much my father. He laid out the new proposal in the same calm tone he used for anything he considered practical. He and Linda would contribute about $12,000 toward Tessa's first year and help buy another used car once she was comfortable driving. Future help could be discussed later. In return, she would choose a school within what Raymond considered reasonable driving distance, come home regularly, stay involved with family, and make an effort to help when they genuinely needed her. None of those conditions sounded outrageous if stripped from their history. That was exactly why the arrangement had lasted as long as it had. The problem was not grades, gas, or helping a grandparent once in a while. The problem was that Raymond still controlled the definition of reasonable after the bargain began. The numbers were specific. The debt could keep moving. That was the part none of us needed, explained again. Raymond finished and waited. He looked confident, not smug. Confident. I knew that expression. He believed the offer spoke for itself. $12,000. A car. Less debt. A school closer to home. In Raymond's world, those were facts. Feelings were what people used to complicate facts. Tessa rested her hands in her lap. Her wrist had healed enough that she no longer wore the support constantly, though she still flexed her fingers when it grew stiff. I watched her do it once. Then she looked at my father. Tessa started by acknowledging her own part. She had wanted the SUV badly, understood Grandpa owned it, and agreed to basic responsibilities and occasional help. She had not resented every grocery run or ride. Sometimes being trusted with adult errands made her feel older and capable, and that was part of why she had not recognized the shift immediately. She did not want me, or anyone else, rewriting her as a helpless victim, simply because the terms later became unfair. She had participated. She had benefited. She had continued saying yes, longer than she now wished she had. None of that gave Raymond the right to change the bargain without her consent. The problem was that the agreement never stayed still. Tessa said the problem was that the agreement never stayed still. At first she helped when she could. Then she was expected to help unless she had a reason someone else considered important enough. Then work became less important than family. Then friends became less important than family. Then distance from home started affecting college money. She looked at Raymond. I agreed to help. I never agreed that you could keep changing what help meant. My father's expression tightened. Not dramatically. His mouth flattened. His eyes shifted toward me for half a second before returning to Tessa. That movement told me he understood she had arrived at this position without needing me to feed her words. Linda spoke next. Her voice was softer. She said they had never wanted Tessa to feel trapped. She said the crash had frightened them too. She said every family had expectations, especially when people were helping each other financially. None of that was entirely false. Tessa listened. Linda moved closer to the edge of her chair. Then she reached for the sentence she had used in different forms all my life. After everything they had done for Tessa, she could not understand why normal expectations were now being treated like something cruel. I felt my body react. There it was. After everything, a phrase that contained no number, no finish line, no moment when the debt became paid. My mother said it directly this time. After everything we've done for you. Tessa did not answer immediately. She looked down at her hands. For a second, she looked 17 again. Not a young woman negotiating college. Not the girl who had survived emergency surgery. Just my daughter. The child who used to sit at my parents' kitchen table doing homework while Linda sliced apples for her. The girl Raymond taught how to check tire pressure. The granddaughter who still loved the people she was refusing. I think that was the hardest part for her. It would have been easier to say no to people she hated. She did not hate them. Finally, she looked up. Her voice was quiet. Gratitude should make you want to give something back. It shouldn't make you afraid of what happens if you say no. No one spoke. The quiet lasted only a few seconds, but it felt longer because no one rushed to rescue it. Linda's eyes dropped toward the floor. Raymond's fingers stopped moving against the arm of his chair. Grant stayed so still beside me that I could hear the faint hum of the furnace beneath the room. Tessa did not look triumphant. Her eyes were wet, and the effort it took to keep her voice steady was visible in the way she pressed her lips together after speaking. That mattered to me more than any victory would have. She was not rejecting people she no longer loved. She was asking people she still loved to accept a boundary that cost all of them something. Linda looked hurt before defensiveness returned and said they had never wanted Tessa to be afraid. Tessa did not argue. The sentence had already made the distinction that mattered. Raymond leaned forward. He said responsibility had consequences. If Tessa declined the conditions, then she was free to do exactly that. But he was not going to pretend his money had no meaning. He and Linda had worked for what they had. They were entitled to decide how they used it. I agreed that Raymond and Linda had every right to decide how to use their money. They could refuse to buy a car or fund a school they disliked. What they could not demand was that Tessa treat walking away from the bargain as betrayal. Raymond continued listing the practical case for a nearby school travel. Winter, emergencies, family, and several points were fears I shared. I stayed quiet anyway. Raymond eventually looked at me. He must have noticed I had not entered the argument. My silence irritated him. My father had spent most of my life expecting me to translate conflict into something manageable. If Linda was emotional, I softened her. If Raymond was rigid, I negotiated. If everyone was angry, I found language that allowed us to keep eating dinner together. That had been my job without anyone ever naming it. He turned toward me and said, "Be the parent." 3 words, and a familiar role opened in front of me. Correct, Tessa. Explain the money. Make the conflict manageable. I thought of the college choice I had surrendered in 2003, the sentence I had used on the morning of the crash, and the offer I had tried to reject for Tessa in October. Then I looked at my daughter. She was not asking me to rescue her. She was waiting to see whether I would take her answer away. I said, "She is answering you." That was all. Raymond stared at me. His face hardened. Linda looked down. Grant did not move beside me. I could feel his hand near mine on the couch, but he did not reach for it. He understood that this moment belonged to Tessa. My father turned back toward her. The room felt different now, not because Raymond had lost his money, because the money had stopped deciding who got the final word. He told Tessa the offer was simple. If she chose a nearby school and accepted the responsibilities they had described, they would help. If she chose otherwise, there would be no $12,000, no replacement car, no later argument about unfairness. He wanted that understood. Tessa nodded. She understood. I watched her inhale. For a moment, I wondered whether the numbers would still pull her back. They could have. No part of me would have blamed her for struggling. She wanted a car. She wanted less college debt. She wanted grandparents. She wanted independence. Human beings rarely get to keep every good thing when values collide. That was what adulthood actually looked like. Not proving you could handle every consequence alone. Choosing which consequences belonged to the life you wanted. Tessa looked at Raymond, then at Linda. Her eyes were wet. She did not wipe them. She said she loved them. That was not in the speech any of us expected. Linda's face broke slightly. Tessa told them she was grateful for what they had done. The rides before she had a car. The birthday money. The SUV. The afternoons at their house. The years before any of this became complicated. She did not erase the love simply because she was setting a boundary around it. Then she said she was not choosing a college based on whether being far away made her easier for them to reach. She was not accepting a car that could become a vote over her time. She would listen to advice. She would help family because she wanted to. She would visit because she loved them. But she would not accept an arrangement in which every one of those things could become a condition later. Raymond's face had gone completely still. He asked whether that was her final answer. Tessa looked at him. "Then I'll find another way." The words were simple. That was why they landed. No triumphant speech. No threat. No promise that she would never need anyone. Just another way. The phrase changed something inside me. My parents had spent years behaving as though their help created the path. Take the path, accept the terms, Refuse the terms, lose the path. Tessa had finally understood there were other roads, harder roads, more expensive roads, roads that required help from us, aid, work, patience, maybe loans, but still roads. My father stood soon afterward. The meeting was over for him. Raymond had never been comfortable staying in a room once the practical decision was made. He repeated that the offer was withdrawn. He said he would not change his mind later, simply because tuition became difficult. Tessa nodded. She had already accepted that. Linda did not stand immediately. She looked at Tessa with an expression I had rarely seen on my mother. Not anger. Loss. She asked whether this meant they were being cut out of her life. Tessa looked at me, not because she wanted me to answer, because that question involved boundaries we had not fully discussed yet. This time, I did speak, but carefully. I told my mother we were not declaring permanent no contact. That was never the goal. There would be no direct financial pressure, no private arrangements built around something Tessa could lose, no favors treated as repayment for past generosity. If Tessa said no to something, that answer could not become evidence that she was ungrateful. Contact would happen at the level Tessa felt comfortable with, while trust rebuilt. My mother's eyes filled. She said I had broken the family. Months earlier, that sentence would have triggered an automatic defense. I would have listed everything they had done, everything I had done, every reason the rupture was not my fault. That day, I did not. Families did not break because one person finally named a condition. If ours could survive only while Tessa kept accepting terms she was afraid to refuse, then whatever broke had already been cracked. I let Linda's accusation sit where she placed it. Raymond helped her with her coat. Before leaving, Linda stopped near Tessa. For a moment, I thought she might hug her. She did not. Maybe she was unsure whether Tessa wanted that. For once, hesitation was appropriate. She told Tessa she loved her. Tessa said she loved her too. No forgiveness scene followed. No healing music. My parents walked out into the cold afternoon. Grant closed the door behind them. The house became quiet. I waited for relief. Instead, I felt tired. Deeply tired. Tessa looked the same. She leaned back against the couch and closed her eyes. For a few minutes, none of us analyzed what happened. That was another way our family had changed. We no longer had to explain an experience immediately, to decide whether it counted. Eventually, Grant asked whether Tessa wanted something to eat. She said no. I asked whether she wanted me to stay nearby. She said she wanted a little time. I respected it. An hour later, she came into the kitchen while I was making tea. Her face was calmer, not happy, but settled. I expected her to ask whether Grant and I were angry about the money. She did not. She asked whether we could drive somewhere. Grant offered to come. Tessa shook her head. She wanted just me. That was the first time in weeks she had chosen me for something when she did not medically need me. I tried not to let the significance show on my face. We drove without a destination at first. I stayed behind the wheel. Tessa was not ready to drive that day, and nothing about the conversation required another test. The roads were clean, though thin snow remained on lawns and rooftops. Late afternoon winter light flattened the sky into pale gray. For several miles, Tessa watched houses pass. Then she said she felt bad. I asked what part. She said all of it. Grandma crying. Grandpa looking at her like she had rejected him instead of money. The fact that $12,000 was still $12,000 no matter how principled she wanted to be. I told her feeling bad did not automatically mean she had made the wrong choice. Then I stopped. I almost turned that into advice. She had not asked for advice. So I asked if she wanted my opinion or just wanted me to listen. Tessa turned toward me. A small smile appeared. She said, "Just listen for a minute." So I did. She talked about wanting the car, about still missing the SUV, even though she hated what it came to represent. About wondering whether she had made the deal worse by continuing to agree. About being angry at Grandma, angry at Grandpa, angry at me, angry at herself. About not wanting to go to college merely to prove she could survive without them. That last part mattered. Tessa did not want rebellion deciding her future any more than she wanted money deciding it. She wanted to know what she actually liked, what she wanted to study, where she could picture herself living, what she could afford, what distance felt like freedom rather than escape. I listened until she stopped. Then she looked through the windshield and took a breath. She asked me one question. "Will you come see the faraway school with me?" My hands tightened around the steering wheel. Almost 5 hours. The number still frightened me. The highway still existed. Winter still existed. The crash still existed. I knew agreeing to visit did not mean agreeing that the school was right. It meant something harder. It meant I was willing to look at a future before deciding I was too afraid of it. I said, "Yes." Nothing else. No conditions. No warning about distance. No reminder about cost. Tessa turned back toward the window. A few seconds later, she rested her head against the seat and closed her eyes. I kept driving. The hardest part of the story was no longer teaching my daughter how to say no to my parents. She had done that. The next part belonged to me. I had to learn whether I could help her walk toward a life that might carry her farther from me than I wanted her to go. Tessa turned 18 on February 21st, 5 months after the crash. There was no grand party. Before September, Tessa might have wanted a restaurant full of friends and photographs. That year, she chose dinner at home, chocolate cake from the bakery, and a few people she actually wanted around her. My parents were not invited. Linda mailed a birthday card signed by Raymond with a $100 bill inside and no note about responsibility or college. Tessa put the card in her desk and sent a short thank you text the next day because she wanted to, not because anyone reminded her. That distinction mattered more than the timing. Physically, she had come a long way. Her wrists still ached in cold weather. The fractured ribs had healed, though, every once in a while, an awkward stretch reminded her where they had been. The abdominal scar was something she rarely discussed. It had become part of her body without becoming the center of her identity. Driving returned more slowly than the rest of her recovery. By February, Tessa could handle ordinary streets comfortably, though highways and certain intersections still tightened her shoulders. Nobody rushed her. The first time she drove alone to the bakery after the crash, Grant and I stood at the kitchen window pretending not to watch. She came home, saw us trying to look casual, and called us terrible spies. It was the first time our fear had become something she could tease us about. The faraway college visit remained on the calendar. We chose a weekend in March when the roads were clear enough that neither of us could use weather as an excuse. I slept badly the night before, not because I thought something terrible would happen, because some fears do not disappear once you understand them. They simply stop being allowed to make every decision. Tessa drove the first hour. That had been her idea. I almost suggested that I take the wheel until we were farther from Madison. I did not. She drove cautiously, maybe more cautiously than she once had, but there was nothing fragile about her concentration. Her hands rested comfortably on the wheel. Music played quietly. We stopped for coffee at a highway exit, then switched drivers because her wrist had started to ache. No drama, no symbolic speech, just a mother taking the next shift. The farther we drove, the more the landscape changed. Madison disappeared behind us. Traffic thinned. Patches of old snow remained beneath trees where the sun did not reach. Tessa became more animated as we approached the town. She recognized buildings from the university website. She pointed out a coffee shop she had read about. She knew which residence hall housed many first-year students, and where the program she was interested in held most of its classes. At the edge of campus, she asked me to slow down because she wanted to see the main entrance from the road. I pulled into a visitor lot and watched her study the buildings through the windshield before we got out. There was no cinematic certainty on her face. She did not look as if she had already found home. She looked curious. That was better. For months, every college conversation had been crowded by what someone else wanted from her. My parents' need for proximity, my fear of distance, even Tessa's own temptation to prove she could choose without us. Sitting there, I could finally see the visit for what it was supposed to be. Information. She was allowed to like the place, dislike it, change her mind, or leave with more questions than she brought. My job was not to turn her reaction into a verdict before she had one. That was when I understood how much research she had done without me. Months earlier, that realization would have hurt. That day, it made me proud. She had not needed me to build the interest. She wanted me to see it. There was a difference. The campus looked nothing like the frightening place my imagination had built. My fear had turned 5 hours away into an abstraction. Distance, roads, emergencies. The actual place contained students carrying backpacks, bicycles chained to railings, a library with too many floors, cafeteria coffee, snow melting beside sidewalks, parents carrying folders, and a tour guide who talked too quickly. It looked ordinary. That was almost disappointing. Part of me had expected the universe to justify my fear by making the place obviously wrong for her. It did not. Tessa asked questions during the tour, not performative questions designed to impress anyone, practical ones. Class sizes, internships, transportation, part-time work, housing after freshman year. She listened carefully to answers. She took notes. I noticed she did not ask how often students went home. I almost did. I stopped myself. There would be time to discuss transportation and holidays later. That day was about learning what the place actually was before deciding what it meant. At one point, we entered the academic building that housed several programs Tessa was considering. She walked ahead of me down a hallway lined with student projects. I slowed. Not intentionally. She simply moved faster. For several seconds, I watched her from behind. The girl I saw was not the 17-year-old lying in a hospital bed asking whether her employer thought she had skipped work. She was not the child in my parents' driveway holding the keys to her first SUV. She was not even the angry daughter, telling me I had become another adult deciding for her. She was 18, walking toward something, and I was behind her. That image did something to me. For years, I had imagined good parenting as staying close enough to catch Tessa if she fell. I was beginning to understand that sometimes the correct position was several steps behind, close enough to be there, far enough that she could choose the direction. After the tour, we sat in the student union with paper cups of coffee between us. Tessa looked tired, but energized. She had that bright focus she used to get as a child when something had captured her completely. I wanted to ask the question that had been sitting in my throat all day. Are you choosing this place? I wanted certainty. Still. Even after everything. Instead, I looked around the room, then back at her. How did it feel to be here? Tessa looked at me with surprise. She had probably expected the other question too. She took her time. She said she liked it. A lot. She liked that it felt big enough to become someone new without being overwhelming. She liked the program. She liked the town. She liked that people seemed to have lives outside campus. She also admitted the distance felt different now that we had actually driven it. Longer in some ways, more manageable in others. Then she said something I did not expect. She had been afraid I would spend the entire visit trying to convince her not to come. I smiled because denying that temptation would have been dishonest. I told her I had thought about it several times before breakfast. That made her laugh. Then she grew quiet. Her thumb traced the seam of the paper cup. She said, "I thought being grown meant needing you less." The words were not sad, just uncertain. I thought about every version of independence that had failed us. Raymond's version, where independence meant earning access to what someone else owned. My old version, where independence meant proving you could handle consequences without creating trouble for the people around you. Tessa's version, where adulthood meant carrying enough alone that nobody could say she owed them. None of those felt right anymore. I said, maybe it means knowing when you're allowed to need someone. I left it there. She nodded. We finished our coffee. The campus visit did not decide everything. Tessa kept comparing, instead of choosing the farthest option merely to defy my parents. She visited the closer university too, talked to financial aid offices, compared programs, housing, part-time work, and what the 529 could cover. We discussed what Grant and I could contribute without damaging retirement and what modest borrowing might look like. There was no miracle scholarship, benefactor, or insurance check waiting to erase the trade-offs. There were forms, numbers, deadlines, and choices. By April, Tessa chose the distant public university. Not because it was far, because after comparing everything, she still liked the program best. The aid package was workable. The cost was higher than the closer option, but not recklessly so. The distance frightened me. It also made sense for her. Those two truths were allowed to exist at the same time. When she told us her decision, I did not ask whether she was sure 3 times. I asked what she needed next. Grant smiled at me from across the kitchen table. I pretended not to notice. The harder financial reality did not vanish, simply because we accepted the choice. Tessa committed part of her summer bakery earnings to personal expenses. Grant and I increased what we could contribute from income. The 529 covered a meaningful portion, aid handled another, and modest borrowing remained possible. Nobody got everything they wanted, which was part of what made the decision real. Around that same time, Linda sent Tessa a letter. Not an email, not a text. A handwritten letter in the looping script I had seen on birthday cards my entire life. Tessa read it alone first. Then she asked if I wanted to see it. I told her only if she wanted me to. She handed it over. Linda's apology was not perfect. She still wrote too much about fear and how quickly grandchildren grow up, but for the first time she named 2 things without hiding behind intentions. She wrote that asking about the car before asking about Tessa in the ER had been wrong. Then she wrote that tying college help to keeping Tessa close had been wrong too. She had wanted reassurance that Tessa would still need them, and had tried to turn money into that reassurance. One sentence in the letter answered a question I had carried since the emergency room. Linda wrote that when she saw us that afternoon, she already knew Tessa had been on the road because of her request. She had been terrified of facing what that meant, and her mind had gone to the SUV because damage to a car was something concrete she knew how to ask about. It was not an excuse, and she did not present it as one. If anything, the admission made the first question sadder. She had reached for the thing she could measure, because the truth behind it was unbearable. Her granddaughter had changed course for her, and now Tessa was behind a trauma bay curtain. For the first time, the sentence from the opening of that day felt explained without being erased. Tessa wrote back a week later. She did not restore the relationship to what it had been. She said she appreciated the apology. She said she was willing to stay in contact. For now, she wanted texts and occasional calls. Visits would happen when she wanted them. Linda accepted that, not always gracefully, but she accepted it. Raymond did not write an apology. In May, he emailed Tessa that he was glad she had chosen a school she believed was right, and hoped she understood he had only tried to teach responsibility. He did not acknowledge the missed work, canceled campus tour, or the way money had narrowed her choices. Months earlier, I would have called him and tried to drag him toward insight. I did nothing. Tessa thanked him for wishing her well, and said she hoped they could have a better relationship eventually. What Raymond did with everything he had heard belonged to him. Summer arrived. By June, the subject of a car returned. Not because my father offered. Because Tessa needed transportation. She would not need a vehicle every day on campus, but between summer work, home, and future visits, having one made sense. This time, Grant and I did not surprise her with keys. We sat down together and agreed on a budget. Between what we could contribute and some of Tessa's savings, we looked for something modest, reliable, and boring. Tessa insisted on contributing. I let her. Not because paying part of the purchase made her more deserving of the car, because she wanted ownership in the literal sense, not the emotional debt sense. We found a used compact crossover for a little under $12,000. Nothing impressive. Good maintenance history, reasonable mileage, reliable safety ratings. When we brought the used crossover home, Grant placed the keys on the kitchen counter without ceremony or a speech about sacrifice. We did have expectations because cars carry real responsibilities. Tessa would contribute to gas and routine maintenance, drive safely, and respect our household curfew while she lived at home. The rules were specific and bounded. None of them bought a vote over which college she attended, how often she came home, or whether she owed us a favor whenever we asked. The first evening she drove it alone, I stood near the front window. Again, some habits take longer to disappear than others. She backed out carefully, paused, then drove down the street. My chest tightened. It always did. But I did not follow her on a location app. I did not text before she reached the corner. I let the fear pass through without turning it into an instruction. By July, college became physically real. Boxes appeared in the hallway, towels, bedding, a desk lamp, a ridiculous number of charging cables. Tessa made lists. Grant bought too many basic tools for a dorm room. I tried not to buy 12 months of toiletries in advance. That may have been the hardest act of restraint in the entire story. Orientation was scheduled for August. My mother learned about it because Tessa told her. Linda asked whether grandparents were invited. Tessa said no. Not angrily. She wanted orientation to be just her, Grant, and me. Linda was quiet. Then she said she understood. That was the consequence my parents received in the end. Not prison. Not bankruptcy. Not public humiliation. They lost automatic access. For 17 years, they had assumed being family meant being included. The car arrangement and college pressure taught Tessa to examine that assumption. Now, invitations were exactly that. Invitations, not entitlements. Linda gradually learned the difference. Raymond struggled more. I stopped measuring my peace by whether he approved. Orientation morning arrived warm and bright. The kind of August day where the sky looked too large. I had expected the morning to feel ceremonial, but most of it was logistics. Grant argued with the trunk. Tessa discovered she had packed 3 phone chargers and forgotten the extension cord she actually needed. I carried a box outside, brought it back in when she changed her mind, then carried it out again. Those ordinary inconveniences helped. They kept me from turning departure into a test of whether I had truly learned to let go. I was still her mother. I could still remind her where the insurance card was and ask whether she had enough water for the drive. The difference was that none of those questions came with a hidden demand that she make leaving easier for me. I did not need to perform perfect detachment. I only needed to keep my fear from becoming a condition of her freedom. We loaded the car before breakfast. Tessa had packed and repacked twice. Grant found one box she had forgotten beside the garage and somehow treated that as proof we would all perish without him. Tessa rolled her eyes. I watched them argue over how to fit the box into the back. Ordinary. Again. That word had become precious to me. When everything was finally loaded, Tessa stood beside the driver's door. Grant was going to ride with me. Tessa wanted to drive her own car. Of course she did. My mind offered one final collection of images. County M, hospital lights, surgery doors, and the neighborhood intersection where Tessa later froze and whispered that she could not move. Then another set arrived. Tessa asking the college questions herself, rejecting $12,000, making it through one intersection, and then another, walking ahead of me on campus, holding the keys to a car that did not contain a debt with no finish line. She hugged Grant first, then me. I held her longer than I intended. Not because I thought something was wrong, because mothers are allowed to miss their children before they leave. She pulled back smiling. I almost told her to text when she arrived. Then I laughed at myself. Tessa raised an eyebrow. I told her she already knew what I was about to say. She said she did. That was enough. She got into the car, closed the door, and started the engine. I stepped back. The tires rolled slowly down our driveway. For 1 second, she paused at the street. Then she turned. I watched until the car disappeared past the row of maples at the end of the block. At the beginning of that year, I thought protecting Tessa meant keeping danger away from her. Then I thought it meant cutting away anyone who could control her. Both ideas made motherhood simpler than it was. What Tessa needed was harder. Parents who would tell her the truth without demanding the answer, help without ownership, and a home she could leave without being accused of abandoning it. My parents had taught me that love came with a ledger. I had nearly answered that by turning love into a safety fence. Neither one left enough room for Tessa to become herself. By August, I understood that love could hold boundaries without becoming a transaction, survive disagreement without requiring surrender, and survive distance without treating departure as rejection. The road ahead did not have to be the one I would have chosen for her to still be hers. Grant came up beside me in the driveway. He did not tell me she would be fine. He knew better than to promise things no parent could guarantee. He simply stood there. I looked at the empty street. Months earlier, a car had become the symbol of everything Tessa owed. That morning, it carried her toward a future no one had purchased the right to choose for her. For the first time, the car was not proof of what Tessa owed anyone. It was simply a way forward.